We're not living it, we're not at meetings.
Is that not the truth? I'll tell you what. What a nice big thing it was for tonight. Elementary school on Valentine's Day.
Call the regular meeting of the DeWitt Board of Education to order. If you join me in the pledge of allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Mr. Stoddard, can you do a roll call?
Sir DeWitt Hansbuddy.
Here.
Jason Hanselman.
Here.
Brad Stoddard here. John Tramontano.
Here.
Lisa Truscott.
Here.
Brad Weaver. Here. Sonny Poker.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. Do we have a motion to adopt the agenda?
So moved.
Support.
Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
We have an agenda. Presentations. Rob is ready to go.
Ready to go. So you have two packets in front of you tonight from me. The first one I'm not going to go through. It's on the title, it's Financial Review. That gives kind of some historical information. As you go through it, feel free to email me if you have any questions, and we'll probably talk about it in a little more detail at an upcoming Finance Committee meeting. But in the interest of time this evening, I really just want to go through the budget update since the governor's proposal was released on Wednesday. So that's where we'll spend our time. Again, I'll try to move through it relatively quickly, knowing that we've got a lot on the agenda tonight, but certainly try to ask questions along the way as we go through it. Governor's proposal came out on Wednesday. It's the first touch point as we start the budget process for 22-23. About a month and a half from now, we'll get the House and Senate versions, and then we'll prepare, go through the reconciliation process. But this is what the governor has proposed. First, he's got a $435 per pupil foundation increase for districts. You'll see in a couple slides how that translates to our district specifically. The governor has also proposed an increase in funding for special education categorical. So currently that's funded on a percentage basis of your prior year's special ed cost. She's proposing to increase that percentage from where we're at currently. The governor has also proposed an increase in funding for our at-risk categorical. That's based on, it's a dollar amount times the number of students, and right now it's prorated. So districts are only receiving about 75 cents on a dollar of what they would otherwise receive. And the governor's proposal, she's proposed to increase that to 100%. Good news is retirement rate is flat. We've had 2 years now of almost flat. It was a minor increase last year. It's flat for this year. You are going to see that we've got a little bit of retirement expense projected in the budget going forward over what we're spending this year. And that's really to reflect the fact that we've got multiple plans that employees can select when they start. Some of the older plans, new employees cannot participate in, and these newer plans have a little bit higher cost to the district because of the fact that there's some matching components of that, because their plans are more like a 401k style versus a true pension plan system. Bit of good news as well is that they continue the funding of basically all the categoricals in the governor's proposal. So all of the retirement categoricals, we've got 4 of them. We've got the UAAL, we've got 2 different MIPSers cost offset, and we've got a normal cost offset. All of that's continued in funding and funded in full. And then they've also continued in the governor's proposal our early literacy and voc ed categoricals. So overall, it's a really, really good budget that's put out to start. Again, we have to see how that matches up with the House and the Senate. But that's kind of, from a 22-23 first look, how it's going to impact our budget. Those are the highlights. But I do want to mention 2 programs that the governor has put into her budget that I think we should at least spend a minute or 2 on tonight and watch to see how they may play out over this budget season. The first is something that she's called the School Aid Infrastructure Fund. It's setting aside $1 billion to help districts with infrastructure costs. She's got this proposed as $170 million annually through fiscal year 2028. Not a lot of details on that right now, other than she wants to target that to districts with higher economically disadvantaged students proportionately, as well as districts that have a relatively lower, on a per pupil basis, taxable value. I think on the economically disadvantaged side, we would receive very little of these funds. From a tax-based side, since we don't have a lot of business, commercial type property within our boundaries, we might be on the lower end of that, so we may be able to receive a little bit more. But again, until they put some numbers out there, and we understand, 1, if this has legs in the House and the Senate, and 2, if it's going to be a competitive grant or if they will specifically identify each district can receive up to this amount. It'll be kind of a little bit difficult to know how this might play out for us. It was put in, I want to say last year's budget as well, and it ended up going anywhere, but it has been reintroduced, and so they're trying to use some one-time funds to do some one-time things, and this is something that we should consider, at least keep in mind. And then the other program has gotten a lot of press in the last week, and this is what the governor is calling the School Aid Educator Recruitment and Retention Program. It's $2.3 billion over 5 years, and it's to be used in a number of different areas. It could be used in her proposal for scholarships for educators, to individuals that want to go into the teaching profession, a stipend for student teachers. So if a student teacher is placed in a district for a semester, it's hard for them to also work. And so with her proposal, this would provide them with some type of stipend while they're doing that student teaching. Programs that can develop school leaders. They talk about grow your own programs. So if we had a parapro, or we had maybe a secretary that had an inclination maybe to become a teacher, there might be some resources to help that individual get to that position. The one that got a lot of press was retention bonuses. This get proposed over a 4-year period of time for employees of school districts that continued on in their existing district, some stipends in essence over a 4-year period. And it starts with all staff eligible, and then kind of whittles down to, in the last 2 years, teachers, counselors, social workers. And then she talks about teacher mentoring and onboarding programs, and then some innovative partnerships. And as I read through it, I'm thinking innovative partnerships is if you're looking at something regional, or maybe you're involving a community college, an ISD, some districts, that might be something where you might have an opportunity to reclaim some of these funds. I think this is probably going to be the more controversial of the two. I'll be really curious to see what the House and Senate puts out, if anything. But there's some big dollars here, $1 billion in the infrastructure, and $2.3 billion here, so I thought it was worth putting that on your radar. So as we look at how her proposal initially might impact our district, and then talk about some other budget input points that we've got, we start with our 21-22 budget. So we have a deficit approved of about $22,000. Keep in mind that's on a $35 million budget. So in essence, we're structurally balanced for 21-22, but that's our starting point for 22-23. The foundation increase, $435 per pupil, would generate about $1.3 million for the district. The increase in the special ed categorical, I've got computed out at about $113,000. I think that might be a little bit low, but I can't quite reconcile the percentages that are in her budget to what I'm seeing flowing through our state aid report. So I went a little conservative, and I'm hoping that we can bump that number up when we get a little more information from House and Senate fiscal here over the next couple weeks. We are projecting at this point a reduction of 31 FTE in our student enrollment, and that is really based upon the fact that we've got our largest class graduating. Our senior class is about 280 students. All of our other grades hover between 220 and 250. So just peeling off our 12th graders and bringing in what we historically have for kindergarten is creating a natural decrease. Again, that's preliminary. That might change a little bit as we go through this process, but that's about a $283,000 reduction in revenue. We also have a reduction in what I'm anticipating in receiving in our voc ed funding from CC RESA. This is because of the fact that we have a business teaching position that's been open all year, and CC RESA provides our revenue based upon our prior year costs. So I'm anticipating our expenses are going to be down for this year, which means less revenue for next year. If you look at it over 2 years, it's pretty much going to be a wash. We're going to have some budget follow our bottom line this year because we budgeted for a teacher and we just had the sub costs since we haven't been able to fill the position. Next year we're going to have the dip of the revenue. I would project by 2023-24 that's going to be back up, but we're going to see a benefit on the expense side this year, a loss on the revenue side next year, and then kind of hopefully back to business as usual. We have a bus sale in our budget for 21-22. That's a one-time cost, so that's removing that revenue. Also removing our ESSER 2 funds. And then what's been nice as we've been developing this budget is all of our contracts are settled. So our teachers, our support staff, our principals, and then the non-affiliated groups. So we know what those costs are going to be with our existing staff. So we've got about $293,000 as we look at our wage adjustments for next year, about $333,000 as we look at steps, longevity, and lateral pay increases, And that covers the FICA and retirement component of the wages as well. So it's not just salary and hourly wages. Insurance, per contract, we move up to the state cap. So on the medical, dental, vision, that's rolling up our medical, the state cap, and then estimates for what our dental and vision might look like for next year. As I mentioned, just a small increase in the retirement, about $10,000. And then if you'll recall from the budget amendment, we added a special ed teacher and 2 paras, but they were brought in at the midpoint of this school year. So the half FTE and the 1 FTE for special ed para is bringing on the full year cost of those 3 positions in essence. Right before the pandemic hit, we were looking at lacrosse, bowling, and hockey, club sports that we were looking to start funding a little more fully at the district level. We had to pause that for the last couple of years, but our amendment for 21-22 started that ball rolling again. This continues that by adding the other half of the bowling for boys and girls, adding the JV lacrosse for girls and boys, coaching positions, and then adding hockey officials into the athletics budget for next year. And then last 2 lines, property casualty insurance. We won't get our actual renewal probably till late May, early June, but I'm anticipating an increase similar to what we got this past year because of the cybersecurity and cyber risk threats that are just happening. It's driving up some of those property casualty insurance costs, and I think we'll probably have another year or so of that before hopefully things normalize out. And then finally, we're looking at increasing substitute rates. We've seen a lot of districts in the area make some fairly substantial moves on those sub rates, and we want to make sure that we are competitive and paying a fair rate for those sub costs. So we've got about $139,000 in the budget for that. All said and told, just off the governor's proposal, we're looking at about a $73,000 deficit. Again, that's as of February 14th. There's a lot of input still to kind of work through over the next couple months. And again, keep in mind that's on a $35 million budget, so we're fairly close to being balanced with some more information that we'll have to work through. So that takes us to kind of a what's next. We have to continue reviewing enrollment. We'll make those adjustments as we see fit. We'll have to continue reviewing staffing, if there's any positions that we find we need to add or anything that we can remove. We also are kind of getting into that time frame where we start learning of teacher retirements. So there might be some of that comes into play here over the next couple of months. We'll work with cabinet as we continue through the process. We'll schedule finance committee meetings as needed, and then I'll provide an update to the board on March 14th, which likely won't include anything from the House or Senate, because I'm being told right around our spring break is likely when those proposals will be out. To the extent anything here has adjusted at all, we'll provide updates for that. So, that was a lot of information in a relatively short period of time, but if anyone has any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Questions?
The 31 FTE assumption for reducing, I know we talk about this every year, but what are we looking like for kindergarten next year? When will we know what our kindergarten class looks like? And I mean, is that going to backfill any of that 31, or is that assuming a certain number?
Potentially. I know we're scheduling enrollment sessions now through our office. I don't recall when official kindergarten roundup is going to be, if we're even running one this year.
Well, yeah, we are, but we don't have a date yet.
Okay.
But
So usually like leading into spring break, we're getting all of that information together. That kind of funnels into what we may or may not do with school choice for the fall. And then the nice thing is Tracy in our office carries a lot of historical information, so she can say, in general, we received, this many new kindergarten enrollments over the summer, as we try to just piece together what that might look like.
We're losing a pretty large class,
Yeah.
so that's coming into play as well.
The other question I had is the substitute rate. Where are we at compared to surrounding districts? I know Lansing was 300. I mean, it was.
For certain things.
Yeah, it was significant, but in specific instances. But what's kind of the going rate now with the dramatic?
Yeah, as I look at comparable districts, I think that we're probably going to need to land on an everyday sub in the rate of around $140, $150 a day. We're currently between like 100 and 110. But as you look at, again, comparable districts to ours, Lansing is a little bit of an outlier because they're using some funds to hit some of their harder to staff buildings, and that's why you're seeing that $300 a day. in a few of the Lansing buildings, but that's,
All
I
of
think.
the, and all of the CT recess schools are at 110
Okay.
this year. So we're the same as them, but we are already having conversations about increases next year.
And
So that
that's-
was an increase, we already increased it this year,
Yeah.
but then an addition.
So that's an increase on top of what we've already done this year?
Correct.
Okay.
Is there a scenario where we need to do that increase in this school year?
I
As of
don't know
now,
if that's
I'd
going
say
to get
no.
us more subs. I mean, the ones that are subbing are already subbing, and it's I guess, a potential, but I know that the conversations that we're having is a pretty significant increase for next year.
2 or 3 weeks ago, I might have said, yeah, we tried to look at doing something. I think it's stabilized a little bit. I'd like to get a little further in the budget process. The one thing you don't want to do is make a jump that you can't then sustain into the following year. But if we need to do some mid-range something this year to get to where we ultimately think we need to be in the fall, I know at least I'm monitoring that and getting input from building principals and obviously Dr. Specker as we go through that process.
Others? Questions? All right. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you.
Brian Ducker.
Good evening. Presentation here. For those who don't know me, I'm Brian Depker. I'm the curriculum director here at DeWitt Public Schools. I'm proud to be here tonight. Thank you for welcoming me to talk about student achievement. All right, so what I'd like to talk to you tonight is, and why I'm here, is that for the second year in a row, the state of Michigan has required all districts to report, to give benchmark assessments, and there's a variety of different benchmark assessments that are available, and then to report those out at different intervals, basically as a piece of COVID learning to see how students are progressing during COVID, during all the tumult that we've been through in the last couple of years with different modes of instruction, all those different things. The state, at one point 2 years ago, had to cancel our normal test, M-STEP. So this was the state's way of kind of keeping their finger on the pulse of how our students were doing throughout the pandemic. So that's why I'm here in front of you tonight. You folks here in the audience and the board. Here's the kind of relevant legislation passed in September. Once again, very similar to last year. Said, and on a condition of us getting funded for the year, that we would be setting goals based on different benchmarks, selected benchmarks. One is NWEA, I'll explain in a minute. That's the one we've been doing for several years, and the one we chose, of course. That we present here in February, and then present in June, basically on our goals, our progress, and then kind of how we turned out there. So I would like to say, too, that I have dozens and dozens and dozens of slides. I didn't want this to turn into like my family vacation slide performance, so I'm going to hit some key slides, some examples of slides. And then tomorrow, you can see as part of the statute, is that we are to post this online. I'm going to have an extended presentation with more of those slides, should you be interested to see drill down to a certain grade level or a certain building. But here tonight, I'm going to explain the process and kind of more show some vignettes of what we're talking about here. So real quickly, I know this is about the third or fourth time I presented to the board about these topics, and so it might be old news to the board, or if you've got a student that's K-8, you're probably familiar with NWEA MAP. So just really quickly, just for everyone's edification here, NWEA stands for Northwest Evaluation Association, and basically it's a well-renowned, it's been around for almost 50 years, used in almost every state, so a widely used benchmarking test to see how students are responding to the Common Core curriculum, to our school curriculum. And then they do that with a system or a test called MAP, and so that's for measures of academic progress. So that is, again, assessment that we give 3 times annually to every student K-8. We looked into it at the high school level, and with the block and some other concerns, it just wasn't a good fit, and we wouldn't have gotten return on our investment at the high school. So we continue, like a lot of schools do, to give it K-8. So it is that kind of true computer adaptive test, unlike the old school paper forms of, gosh, we gave ACT Explorer to 7th graders when I started my career. And you could find a narrow band, like a grade level below or a grade level above, and you were testing a 7th grader. NWA, if you give it to a 1st grader, they'll keep getting questions right until they start getting them wrong, and it finds their level. If a student is reading it and operating within the curriculum at a 5th grade level, takes it in 1st grade, we'll know that with precision. So it's a very useful tool in both reading and math in that way. So by law, we were required to create some benchmark goals. Last year we did it a little bit differently. Last year we looked for kind of typical growth, and that was problematic in some ways. This year we decided to kind of maybe take another look and look at how we've been using NWEA. And what I'll talk to you quite a bit about is quintiles. The quintiles are a very important measure for us, the national norms. And we decided to look at this like a lot of things, like an RTI triangle, and I'll explain that in a minute here. But basically what we want is 80% of our students performing at grade level or above. And when that happens, we have sufficient ratio there to intervene with students that are not at grade level in intensive and strategic ways. So anything less than 80, the research says, well, we've got to go back to brass tacks, look at our tier 1 instruction, the stuff that everybody gets, and say, how do we get kids to 80%? So it only made sense. That's what we do kind of reflexively. It made sense for us to do that now as well. So that was our goal. We wanted everyone in our grade levels K through 8 our goal would be 80% of our students K through 8 to achieve at least the average quintile on NWEA, and I'll show you more what I mean here in just a moment. More on that, again, so as a goal, an actual goal, kind of a time-bound, measurable, specific goal, we want to get, by the end of this year, halfway. If there is a gap, say, I give an example here, if a grade level 70% of students are achieving at that average, high average, or high level, we want to get it to 80. By the end of this year, we'll try to cut that in half, make it 75, and by the end of next year, June 23, we want to see that at 80. So that's kind of the measurable, or the kind of how the goal will be achieved. Again, so we want to close that achievement gap by June 23. Okay. Falls on the one, I think we're throwing the Cooper Cup there, I think so. All right, okay. All right, next here, rigorous goals. What I do want to say here, I think it's worth noting that other schools, and some guidance we got from like state associations and others were like, make your goals really simple. Just say you're going to show growth, right? And to me that was kind of like shooting fish in a barrel. We were kind of encouraged to do that a little bit last year too. Dr. Dieter and I didn't agree with that. Dr. Spicker and I didn't agree with that. So we didn't feel like that kind of, hey, we'll just show some growth, any growth, was in keeping with our community, our high standards, for growth and achievement. So we decided to set a rigorous goal. We want to hit 80% of our students at that average or better. So quickly about NWEA quintiles. Okay, again, this has become really, you see this both in their names, the descriptors there, the colors. This has really become kind of the currency or the coin of the realm when we talk about NWEA tests, both with students, both with staff, and here when I speak with the board. When you nationally score compared to your peers nationally, in the 20th percentile lower, that's considered low, and you're in a red color zone. And you can read the rest here, 21 to 40 is orange and low average, et cetera, until you get all the way up to high performance, that top quintile, where you're 81st percent or higher, and you're in the blue zone there. So we thought if we use this all the time, these color codes, these descriptors, why wouldn't we incorporate that into our benchmark? So here's an example of how we use that, both in the kind of global, working down into more specific student by student. These are grade level reports we compose, so like all 250 or so kids from the 7th grade, for example. This is a sample one from an NWEA, this is not our data. But you can see the color coding at the bottom. I can quickly and easily see kind of a distribution of where our students are compared to their peers in the national norm group there. So that's very instructive. We look at that in our school leadership teams and our data teams to see what the kind of overall health of an entire grade level. We use this, and we now have class reports in NWEA where an individual teacher can look at a class of students. It's right in front of them. Maybe they got rostered yesterday, overnight at loads. Now the teacher can look in and say, what's the distribution? Where are my kids on these skills And you can see here, this classroom of 23, this actually is a classroom in our district to be named, remain nameless. But that's about the distribution we're looking for there, right? Where there's 1 student who needs intensive intervention, 3 students who need strategic intervention, and the other students can probably access the kind of tier 1 curriculum. And we may be looking at, of course, the students, 5 students maybe advanced, or what can we do to push their learning, right? So that type of information to a teacher, they might not even have ever laid eyes on their students, and they can already see a data profile of where they're coming, what their needs might be, how, make a million curricular and pedagogical decisions about that classroom. So this is a very, again, in those quintiles. And lastly, if you're parents in the district, you've probably seen a student report or report like this, again, where we can track an individual student's progress year on year in a subject area. And once again, you see those 5 quintiles and you see those colors. It's the same, so we're all talking from the same songbook, as it were. So it's a very important thing to us. I thought, again, that's where we should be spending our time here. Now, this is the slide I always include here too, because as a former high school principal in another district, it's amazing the things that students do in the arts, in physical fitness, sciences. A lot of those things don't show up in a reading and a math test, right? So this is just a sliver of who we are as student achievement. Doesn't take into account all those other things that would be the part of the DPS experience. But it's an important sliver, reading and math, right? So we try to keep it in perspective, but also give it its due and look at it and study it and respond to it. So just for reference, of course, this is what if I were to chart out NWA's quintile norms, it would look like this, right? I just want that as a basis so you can see where DeWitt School scores on the assess versus their peers in the nation. And again, this gives us the ability to kind of like apples to apples look at kindergarten versus 7th grade versus 5th grade and so on. Real quick note, again, so why do I put the lowest scores, maybe the less desirable scores up top and the higher scores at the bottom? That just goes from our kind of decade and change of building these RTI triangles as kind of metaphors for our instructional programming, where we kind of build a foundation of students who are being successful at the grade level we want them to be, or even excelling. And then we're trying to get down to very few students who need intensive or strategic intervention. So that's why you might think, oh, it's kind of flipped upside down, but the educators in the room, this looks more natural. We're focusing on some of the kind of reddish colors at the top. Those are the kids that might need intervention. So without further ado, here are our reading data from NWEA. What I've done here is taken from fall to winter. And you can see here versus the typical, what the national norm would be, our students perform quite well, right? So this is not an unrealistic goal. We're very, very close, okay? So we want our blues, our greens, and our yellows to be at about 80%, meaning those kids who are below grade level, they're a small enough number that we can intervene with the staffing we have and be successful. So what we have here, I believe we were at about 79% in our fall, and we did dip by about a point or 2 in our reading. This is K-8 across about 2,000 students. That's a pretty significant number of students. I'm disappointed by that. We are going into our triennial data reviews with our building level teams starting tomorrow, and this will be a big topic of conversation to try to dig into the data and see what's under the hood and see what's going on. And it may be, just follow me here too, it may be that all these students grew, some of them didn't grow enough, and now they've slipped into a different quintile. Does that make sense? And so this doesn't mean that kids didn't grow, this just means maybe they didn't grow enough in some areas, and that's something we need to look at, own, and make an action plan about, kind of investigate, hypothesize, and make a plan. So I just want to be transparent and honest. Again, this is a piece of making those rigorous goals, taking a chance, getting out on a limb, right? That you might have a step back, not a big one, but we're hoping for a bump with our final administration in the spring. For math, we have a similar story, very, very close, about 77%. At those 3 levels there where we're at or above grade level in math, K-8, again, over 2,000 students in our districts in those 9 grade levels. And then we had just a smaller, but again, significant, maybe a 1-point drop overall in those 3 categories, the average, the high average, and the high for math in the winter. So I don't know if it was we did have some snow days in the middle of that. I mean, honestly, sometimes things like that as a former building principal can kind of come into that. Sometimes you do feel, just because of situations or weather, there's a little bit of a ding that happens in the winter, and then we can see a rebound in the spring. We'll be hoping for that. We can also do in the presentation I'll be posting tomorrow with kind of like the million slides, the family vacation slides that I was talking about, right? Here is one other look we can look at, the current reading grades across buildings. So now I've sliced it into Shady Road, Scott, Herbison, and the middle school respectively there, and you can see their distributions as far as achieving the goal or what their individual building goals should be to get 80% of their learners at one of those 3 levels. Finally, state law requires is something we do as a part of the state's continuing improvement process. It'll be available kind of like across the board tomorrow on the transparency paper. Here's a taste. We've also been required by state law, and again, it's something we do anyway, to examine our subgroups. And the ones that have been identified by the state are gender, so male and female students, socioeconomically disadvantaged students, students with disabilities, so students who are in special education have IEPs, and non-white students, students of color are another subgroup that we have. So this is an example. So this is now we're drilling down to one building, and I'm giving you a cross-section of the achievement overall, male, female, low SES, students with disabilities, and students of color. Okay? And I'm going to have that available for each building. All right. So again, that's just a taste. I mean, we could go through the whole night here, but I know there is a packed agenda. This will be posted in its entirety on the district page tomorrow, along with all the grade levels, the buildings, the comparison from fall to winter, a little more on the kind of exact numbers we'll be looking to hit as far as goals in each respective level, and again, those subgroups. So in the meantime, our students and staff will continue to work hard toward student growth goals. Those of you in the audience and board, if you've got students that are in K-8, you'll be getting that parent report, the family report home very soon. And the teachers we do a nice job of this at a lot of different grade levels. Teachers are working with students when they get the results back, try to interpret them, set a goal, understand what this means for them as a learner. Teachers will be looking at the new results, and like I've showed you for the class report, try to decide, okay, what does this mean for me in my class? At the middle school, they're switching from trimester soon, they get all new kids in some of their hours. This will be priceless information for them. And once again, we hope to decrease gaps in our goal of 80% of our students performing at those levels. And I will be back in June to report out on our progress to the board. So, does the board have questions for me?
Yeah, thanks, Brian. So what you're saying in DeWitt, is that consistent with what others are experiencing around the state, others who are doing NWA? You can see this across the state in the data, correct?
As far as, not always, only if schools report it. So that's the one thing with like MSTEP and SAT and some of those things we can definitely see. That's all transparent and out there.
And tomorrow.
Tomorrow it will be. I mean, tomorrow
it's going
is
to
due.
be on people's websites, so we'll be able to dig into other districts to kind of see where they are and how we're comparing to that as well.
I will say that some districts, there are other products out there. Some use STAR, some use iReady, so it's not always going to be an apples to apples. But
are you hearing anything kind of anecdotally from other districts that people are
typically when we share our scores, people are kind of like, how'd you do that? Like ours aren't looking that good. Especially, I didn't get a chance to share tonight, but some reading measures, DIBELS that we were talking about earlier, those measures, while ours are down a bit, it's not compared to a lot of our peer districts or districts around the area. We've done a nice job in recovering there too. So this, in general, I didn't like the little dip, right, from fall to winter, but overall, you can see how we do against the national average, and we're skewing upward quite a bit there. So that's even during a pandemic, and those norms, by the way, are norms before a pandemic. So we're competing against students that were not dealing with the issues that we are too. So that's something to keep in mind.
I think it's also important to note that even on Friday, we had kids that were testing, like this is brand new data, and so those kids that were testing this past week were all makeup tests from either snow days or quarantines. I mean, there were kids testing in the hallway, so not necessarily your ideal testing situations as well. But we were trying to get as many of the kids tested so we could have the most accurate data.
I would be interested in knowing how our data compares to our data pre-pandemic. I appreciate everything that you presented, but I think in order for us to measure learning loss, it would be great to have that information shared as well.
Yeah, I think it's definitely, we're capable of doing that. I've worked with the county to pull some of these in a more quick fashion, but we could go back in the past and do that as well. At some grade levels, we've been doing this since 2016, 17, so we've got quite a rich data set there. The other piece, because like Dr. Spickard said, this is kind of hot off the press, is I typically then take the kind of like district-wide report. Now, if you recall this in the past, and I kind of plot us against where we've been in the past and show that growth, not only fourth grade to fourth grade to fourth grade to fourth grade, but a cohort of kids, say the graduating class of 2027, I want to see how they've moved relative to the national average. And so those might be things that, whether that's in June or if that's something that can be shared in the interim or posted, that's stuff that I typically do as I get time once. But that's a great point, because I'm like you, I'm craving context here, and until we know how we're performing vis-a-vis, prior to the pandemic, it's tough to make much of that.
Just a quick follow-up, and I don't want you to take a whole lot of time, but I want you to talk about what you do with this now, and then what is that process? You talked about data dumps or whatever you refer to them as, but then how does that? Are there recommendations that come back to us on resources that are needed? Are the resources there to address these gaps? Can you talk briefly? Because I know it's probably a pretty in-depth process.
To answer your last question first, that could be the result of that kind of process. But we try to follow a research-based protocol, and one that's in line with the state requirements. The new state system is the Michigan's continuing improvement process, where instead of just having a school improvement season in every spring, that you're doing that kind of all year, more trying to embed it all year round. But we've been doing that here in DeWitt for 10 years now. Like I said, after each one of these intervals, we're sitting down to really dig into our data with our teams. We have a process. We're led by some folks at the county who really do help us with some of the installation, like I said, some of the best practices there, where we take a look at the data. We try to look at it through a lens, a non-partial lens, discover kind of a discovery period. What are you seeing in the data? Look for trends. We try to identify a distinct problem statement from that, and then create hypotheses that may lead to fixing that problem. And so instead of, we've all been in work sessions where you get a set of data, and all of a sudden you go right to fixes, right? And we fight with protocols very hard not to do that. We don't want knee-jerk reactions. We want to be steeped into the data, really understanding what it's telling us, looking for patterns, collectively hypothesizing, collectively action planning, and then monitoring those action plans, adjusting, coming back. And an action plan, like you're saying, could be at the end of the day, we need to take a look at the curriculum. We're not teaching. We're not able to teach this one piece that's being, tested here at NWA, and that's because we need a different resource. That's where we may be coming back, myself or to Rob or to you, to look for, and that could be a hypothetical piece of that.
And Brian's also working with the specialists to help break down the data, help to look at those subgroups and find where those gaps are, and then we're also meeting vertically and horizontally to make sure that we're filling where we see those gaps.
All right,
That's a great question. Any others?
Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Right, so I'm going to be talking and presenting a little bit on the outcomes of the mask task force meetings and some information that we have to share with you. So one of the things that I wanted to make sure is we talked a little bit about the team members and people who were on the team. So we had, in addition to myself, Brian, the curriculum director, we had Brian Byers, our DEA representative, or the teacher rep. We also had Jean as our DESPA support staff rep. And then Linda, elementary principal rep, and then Sean from the high school as our secondary admin rep. And then Dwight served on the team as a board rep. And we had Courtney, who was filling in for an admin at TV, but also is a peer leader and a specialist in the district. And Deb, kind of the office contact tracing rep. She deals with a lot of the secretaries who are in charge of the contact tracing. Will and Kevin, both parent reps. And then Patty from CC Risa, who is our nurse. So obviously, 2 parent reps, and we tried to pick parents who were already involved in the district and had opposing points of view. And then I've asterisked, we have several of our team members who are also parents as well. So our first meeting was on the 6th, and on the 6th we talked a lot about different metrics, talked about data. We also voiced what our thoughts were on the current plan or possible plans. We met again on the 12th to really review, and we found it was really hard to come up with an alternative metric, that either the time that was involved or the expertise that was involved, that being able to come up with an alternative metric. We looked at hospitalizations, but we're not the medical experts to determine when we would mask or not mask, depending on that. So we kind of went through all of that on the 12th, and at the end of the 12th, talked about there's potentially 4 different recommendations that we could bring to the board. And then we worked on the 27th to really try to narrow down what those recommendations could be or look like to bring to you here today. So the first recommendation is to really continue with the plan. So the first part of that is 1A, which is the current tiered masking plan, which is based on different transmission levels of CDC. And that current plan requires universal masking at high risk, and then it requires masking for K8 at substantial. Another version of that would be to continue with the current plan but tweak it for substantial. So basically that would have only universal masking required at high, but then at substantial we would get into the strongly recommended for all grade levels. So one of the things that we talked about back in the fall when we came up with the plan was that because of students in elementary schools not having access to their immunizations, that we would want to make sure that we were considered of that. And now that they do, that's a possible tweak that could be put in place. So just to kind of see what that looks like now. So if it opens. So at high risk, which we are at right now, it would be universal masking for all. And then again, subsequent, and it looks like it's, oh, there we go. Subsequent level would be K8 that would be required. And again, we could alter that based on having access to vaccinations at this point. So some pros of that is that it maintains the status quo, which is simple to understand for staff, students, and families. It mimics the federal public transportation requirement, reduces contact tracing and quarantines, and the number of students who would use the Test to Stay program. And it keeps in guidance with associations and organizations around masking guidance. It has the most support from the stakeholder survey, but that was a couple of months ago. And it keeps students in school with no building or district shutdowns due to outbreaks. Obviously, some downfalls of the plan is that we've heard about potential mental health concerns with some of our students. It may interfere with young students' language development. Relationship and connection building takes longer when students cannot see teacher faces or vice versa. And some reports of that it's harder to obviously teach and learn with a mask on, whether it's the glasses or being able to project the voice. And mask fatigue and concerns about no end in sight. So those are some cons of that. A second recommendation from the committee was that we could look at a sunset date. So the first part of that would be to create a date that the current mask plan, for example, March 15th, or another date that the board would be interested in looking at, to move to a strongly recommended mask policy. And then a variation of that would be to create kind of a tiered system, to start with the high school and then work their way down to middle school and elementary students to see how things are going at the upper grades before moving. There is a big gap between the two that are in this recommendation just because of spring break and wanting to make sure that we have seen through our own local trend data some pretty big outbreaks after Halloween, around the holidays and things of that nature. So to kind of give a little bit of space there between those. So where are the pros? There we go. The pros is that it's an off-ramp for required masking, and a lot of people are looking for that. It mimics the community policies and general behavior, so what you're seeing out at the store or at the playground or at people's houses or at sporting events. People are choosing to mask or not mask. It allows for choice for students and families. It has increased availability of, now we have increased availability of high filtration masks. We've learned a little bit more about one-way masking being effective. And then some cons is that it is going to increase close contact. So an example that Linda gave at the committee is that right now with two-way masking, she might have 3 students that she would have to quarantine. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, for those of you who are there, that it would be almost 12 students if students weren't masked. So it will increase that, but the good news is we do have the test to stay option. But that is an increased workload on the offices and staffing and testing, and we need to make sure that we have capacity for that. Increased likelihood of disruption, so staffing shortages, forced closures, short periods of remote learning are a possibility. Then research shows that leads to mental health issues as well. And then test to stay is a requirement that students do mask for 10 days. So if we don't have a masking policy, students who have tested to stay would still be required to mask. So if we were to look at something like the second option, I think it would be important, and the committee thought it would be important, especially a lot of us, that there would be some sort of potential safeguard in place. So we could look at local data in each of the buildings and determine some sort of threshold that if we see a certain amount of cases in that building, then there would be a requirement to mask. So for example, 25 students, about 2.5% in the high school, if we were to see that many positive cases, which I think we've been there a couple of times, Jody, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but like especially after Omicron or holidays, we might get up to that point to where masking would be required. So that's a potential safeguard. So things just for us to continue to consider are some of those expert recommendations on what we should be doing. The past survey data or maybe a new survey. The data and the numbers, so I'm constantly taking a look at that. Obviously mask fatigue and community practices and public trust. So one of the things that we're seeing even nationally are that the numbers are declining, and we wanted to make sure that there is a declining infection rate across the nation and even within our own county. Vaccines and boosters and therapeutics are now available, and we do know that one-way masking works. So one of the things that we talked about is bringing these recommendations to you, potentially surveying the community again to see where they are, if the board feels that that's necessary, and then come back at the next meeting where if you would want to, you could act and choose one of those. I do think that the current plan that we do have in place does consider that safeguard factor because it is based on the cases. We could, before the next board meeting, projections show actually be at a substantial level where masks will be recommended and not required. So that's the information that I have for you on that. I will come back up to answer your questions because I have additional resources available up there.
So I'm going to fire away while you're walking, if that's all right.
Yeah.
So I get the survey idea. I've been hawking this data for like the last 2 weeks, and if we continue on the current trajectory, we're going to be out of masks. District, if we take, let's start with one. If we just stay with the status quo, we'll be out of masks potentially in the next week or two in high school. Into 1B, we could be district-wide out of masks again in the next potentially the next week.
I mean, we ran the projections and it's dropping drastically. So, for example, just in so on the first of the new year, we were at 686 cases, which is about 22% positivity rate. Then 2 weeks later, we peaked at 1,378 cases in the county, which was a 30.5% positivity rate. So currently, we're at, in the county, around, and this is as of the 12th, 376, so like 1,000 cases less. and about a 16-17% positivity rate. So they are rapidly declining.
So that's 376 in a 7-day average, right?
Yes.
So that's
the average of the ones that were there higher. So the obviously the closer we get to the present, the numbers keep decreasing.
Sean, have you talked to anybody from the health department about the positivity rate? I know that it still kind of remains high, higher than we would like, but is it high because home testing is more readily available and people are either testing negative and not choosing to get something, or they're testing positive? Does the home testing and accessibility of some of those home tests affect that at all? Have they told you? Or
So it depends. So, one of the things that I've tried to put out in communication is that it's really important for families to report those home tests. So if they're not reporting it, it can't count toward they're not having it for, in the last 90 days. So what I do know is that our community is really, really good about reporting. So for example, I don't know if you saw the Lansing State Journal article that came out, but we're showing at 21% where some other districts are showing lower, and there's a lot of reasons why. So I've had conversations with superintendents that some of them aren't testing. If they don't test, then they don't have reports. Some of the dashboards only include the positive cases that the health department has actually told them. And so they probably have 20% less what the health department actually tells them what they actually have. Our families are really good about contacting the offices, and so it's actually funny because, not funny, but interesting, because we got an email from the health department today saying, I'm learning that you are already know about these cases by the time I send out this communication. Do you still want me to send out this communication? And my answer was yes, because it confirms. But our families are so good about calling and saying. And the other pieces, and the reporter asked, are these probable or positive? And I said, well, a lot of times a doctor will tell someone to assume it's a positive case, it's a probable case, but they get put on our dashboard as whatever is told to the office. So if a parent calls and says, my kid is positive, then we report it as positive. So there is some variance between how all districts are even doing their reporting.
Can you talk a little bit about Test to Stay, how that is going, what that looks like?
Yeah.
And then current guidelines for the definition of close contact.
So so let's talk about close contact. So current definitions with our health department is if they're masked is 3 feet, unmasked is 6 feet. So that's close contact. And then there's school close contact and there's out of school close contact. The Test to Stay program is supposed to be for just school contacts because the percentage of flipping to positive is so low. Like, I don't have the actual percentage, but less than 10%. Whereas the out of school flips are between 17 and 30%, depending on who you, so the health department has advised the risk is too high for a Test to Stay for home contacts. However, we're doing whatever we can to keep kids in school. So tomorrow we're starting for out of school contacts, and actually the last 3 days we've had some parents bring their kids in the morning that were because a parent was positive or a sibling was positive. They don't have any siblings. They've been able to isolate, and we've gone ahead and tested. So in the past week and a half, there have been 12 students that have tested and have been able to stay because they had negative tests. So with the numbers declining and even our dashboard where it is, I think that we have the capacity to do this, and so that's why we want to try to do it, because our mission and goal is to keep kids in school. So much to where Deb and I were running the Test to Stay. I was helping swab kids this morning and doing it because Lindsay can't do Mondays, and so we're just really committed to have ongoing options for our families to be able to use that.
What is the I'm just trying to get an idea of what that actually looks like from a parent's perspective, from a kid's perspective. Are they missing out on an hour of school in the morning, or
no? So
how quickly is the turnaround?
Yeah, so it's well, and it depends on what we get in. But right now, it's been a few students in the morning, and Usually our secondary students will come during the earlier time, and then our elementary students come during the end time. There's a consent form that needs to be filled out. It takes 15 minutes. The students or parents swab their kid's nose, and then we, put it into the test. We have kids that are on devices or just hang out for the 15 minutes, and then we're able to get them slipped. So I really don't think anyone's been tardy, but they do get a tardy pass if they are. But for the most part, the way it's set up is to get them to school. There's a little bit of issues because of the
They come
traffic.
here.
Yeah, they come
to this
here.
building.
They come.
It's not on a
it-
building by building.
No,
basis.
it's one place here where we do everything. I mean, and they have to kind of account for the traffic, the drop off, but the parents that have had to come pretty regularly know to come a little bit earlier to avoid that. So here's the thing is that if you are a school contact, you're required to test every other day, but because of the potential flip for home, we're requiring that daily. And so it's 5 days from your last contact. So if you're a family and you can't isolate, either because you have shared restroom or maybe a single family where the positive parent is the one doing childcare. So it is, and I've had questions about that too, like if you have a large family and one kid gets it and then another kid gets it, it's 5 days from the last contact. So some kids could have to test to stay, or if they chose to quarantine longer because it's 5 days from that last contact. So, and then, I don't know, Dwight, as a board member, you participate. I don't know if you have anything that you would like to add as far as the task force or?
No, I think the task force has attempted to look at multiple variables, as it's been discussed. There was a lot of conversation around metrics. I think there was a lot of discussion around, from the buildings, what the staff felt would keep the teachers in a position to feel safe. And I think that Brian talked a lot about that from the vantage point of getting people on board with the idea of if we shift it to something else, that we need to roll out some education, help people feel better about where we're at. So I feel like we've done to the best of our ability what we could in terms of pulling information together. We did discuss the idea of, do we survey again? The last time we had this discussion as a board, folks had the impression that, well, we can't get any more information. We've already done that. It's, we got what we need to know. But I think that there was perhaps some sentiment that perhaps if we did survey again, there might be a different opinion at this point based on where the numbers are. I believe the nurse did say that our area was still in a hot pocket right now, but in the next couple of weeks, we might see a break in that. So, I mean, there was, I would say, some different opinion at the table about, well, how long? There was some discussion about what do we do behind spring break. Is spring break much like coming off of Christmas break? Folks being in different places, potential for exposure. Do we have rates go back up? Do we look at other things that we could do? What do we do at that point to continue to have people be safe and to continue to have students be in school? Because that's the end goal. Nobody wants to see their kid online in that position that we were in over the last couple of years. Everybody wants them in school. So I think it was a good discussion. I can say that there wasn't always agreement, but that's okay, right? We have to talk through it and get to a point where we can come to a common goal, which is everybody at the table wants their kids in the school. It was interesting for me to hear from the building administrators what their thoughts were and the comfort of their staffs in terms of delivery with where we're at and what they thought might work.
And I do, sorry to interrupt there, but I do want to talk, because I said I would, with the task force, and I forgot to do that in the presentation, kind of report to where people were, because we were kind of on a continuum. So a quarter of the task force really thought we should stay at 1A. I think one person of that said 1B. And the reason why was just because they felt like the quarantining and the number of kids was a little worrisome. And then a quarter of the team felt like we should go to an option in the 1 or the 2A or B. So we had different, kind of bell curve there. And then half of the team really felt like we should stay with 1A until we can figure out either some sort of safeguard or some sort of metrics or some sort of other, like, what's that other? Or the quarantining not have to happen and we could get to the 2. And so that's where the safeguard at the very end came into play as far as a local metric that we could potentially use, because, I'm really concerned with just throwing out a date and saying, oh, we'll be okay by this date, but can we be using some data to make that decision? And then, as we've seen the numbers really come down, again, the current plan that we put in was to account for what's the plan when the numbers come down. And so, we were only really requiring the masks when they were the highest, when there was the largest amount of risk, with the caveat that, the substantial could even change to recommended versus required once the younger kids had a chance to be vaccinated. So, those are just things to consider. And so I'm willing to, bring back more data. We can survey the options out. You've heard what the task force has put together. You've heard about the current plan and the numbers. And that's the other thing, is that, we could potentially be out of masks before we even have a chance to vote on what to do too.
Am I being overly optimistic on that? Because I'm just looking at the data in the last 7 days from your committee. It's a dramatic.
It's dramatic.
Just in a week, the number.
We've had a little bit of kind of a plateau, but we don't have all of the data from the weekends. So the weekends are tricky. You'll even see that on our dashboard. You'll see kind of a dip and then an increase, because I don't necessarily think they report on Sundays, but they're supposed to. And that's the other thing, is that, I try to send out guidance by 5 o'clock on Sunday, as far as, okay, this is the plan, but the data could come in by 8 p.m. And so because we're getting so close, it's kind of like, when does that data go out? And then some of the criticism that we got for last year was that plans were changed before families had a chance to talk to their kids. So we're trying to prevent that as well, so families to be able to talk to their kids, especially if we were able to get into a case to where they are recommended, that parents can sit down with their child and say, you might have some friends that aren't masking, but I really want you to make sure that you're wearing your mask, or vice versa, you might have some friends masking, but it's okay if you don't mask. And so I think it's important for families to have that time, and I'm afraid if something goes out at 8, they might not have the time to think about that or have those conversations. Also, that communication has gone out on a Sunday, and at the beginning of the year, we said that would, no matter if the numbers went up or down, that would be the plan for the week. So it's, do we stay with that? Do we try to do a daily thing, which might be a little problematic, especially for teachers and administrators? But I do think that our plan is going to see potential for these to come off if people choose so, and hopefully that families or staff who have been a little worried now with the one-way masking research with high-quality masks, as well as the numbers trending down, and that's the other thing that's important, and it wasn't at the task force, but at cabinet beforehand. Emily from Shavy Road said she's been really excited because when they called to talk about close contacts, the parents are like, oh, they're fully vaccinated, and they're able to confirm that on MICR. So there are a lot of kids who are avoiding quarantines just because they're fully vaccinated now too.
It seems I was just going to say, it seems like 1B is a pretty simple. So that seems like an easy one, right? Adjust everybody to
the same criteria. Now that
So
everybody's had a chance to be vaccinated.
Because that was the rationale. So it seems like at least everyone, once we drop the substantial across all grades, are treated the same way. I don't know what others think about that.
Yeah, I didn't memorize 1B, but if you're saying that it doesn't differentiate between grades.
Yeah, it was K8 and 912 for the two groups before.
Because when we started school, they didn't have the opportunity to be vaccinated.
I guess for me, I appreciate the work of the task force. It's certainly not easy to talk about an issue that's so controversial, and appreciate the recommendations that you've come up with. But, I feel like there's been so much talk about listening to the data and the research, and then we're acknowledging that one-way masking works. So if one-way masking works, I don't know what I don't know if we need to continue waiting for numbers to go down. People can make the choice at their comfort level to wear a mask if they want to. And the data, you know, that the Lansing State Journal just recently published of the schools, I hear what you're saying, that it may not be accurate, but I have trouble picking and choosing what data that we're paying attention to. So if we're basing decisions on data and research, I don't think we can forget those two important points. So, you know, I also don't support picking just a date out of thin air, because to me, that doesn't make any sense, because we have no idea where we're going to be on March 1st or March 15th. So it seems like a silly approach.
So what do you think?
I would be ready to unmask. I'm wearing one because I have been sick, and out of respect to other people, I felt like I should wear a mask. So from my observation of after-school activities and sporting events and things of that nature, I think that people appear as if they are ready if given the choice. I don't think that we would have as many, I don't think it would reflect the survey, I guess. But that's not research-based, it's not concrete, it's just an observation.
The previous survey or a potential new survey?
The one that was already done. And if we were to do a new one, I think we need to be very clear in the way that we ask the question. So.
Yeah, let's not forget, just following up with Lisa, let's not forget, we did a survey before all of this started and had a lot of input from the community, and it was set aside and other decisions were made. So there was feedback I received after that, and we're responding to another survey because we didn't listen to them the first time. So that generally, that was my concern, is what DeWitt brought up the survey, is how much would we really get that's valuable data to analyze that this is really, you know, the voice of the community. You know, I would agree with Lisa. If we look at other districts around us that have taken a different approach to it, you know, we're not seeing considerable issues in those districts that would create concern. The general concern I have is probably more on the faculty, is, all right, if now we go to, you know, it's a choice, you know, are there teachers or say administrators within the school system, we're already having difficulty with substitutes, are there those that would have an issue with that in class? And I would hope that would be driven right back to you. You know, that's a residual concern. I'm with Lisa. I think we're at a point now, if we look at the data, and even as we looked at the data in the past, we looked at specifically Clinton County. The health department said, oh, you have to look at Ingham County as well. And now they're almost negating that. Oh, we're just going to look at your county here. So
We've looked at Clinton County from the very, very start.
I understand, but when we reached out to them, you said you have to also consider Ingham County because people work in there. So we were below those numbers at that time, but we had to consider a larger piece of the pie. Now we're still looking at, we're seeing Ingham County taking a different approach. So here we're in an adjacent county, looking at the same thing. Our numbers might be on the edge now, but I think if the data, as Jason's identified, it's continuing to decline. You know, there's two approaches. There's the choice option, which there's clearly, we're hearing from the community, they'd like a choice. So the choice is they can wear them or they don't need to wear them, but that's their choice.
Do we have any idea what percentage of the faculty has had COVID?
No, and I mean, that's a medical, yeah.
I just didn't know.
They can self-disclose.
I was just curious in terms of, you know,
We have
worrying about
a
staffing levels.
confidential survey that is filled out of when and who has what, and has been out for what, but, and we have a large percentage of our staff that have been vaccinated too. But it is worrisome because especially the day that we had to close, that was a really rough week for us with the numbers the way they were. And I just, you know, I think that what we hear, you know, at the board meeting is one thing, and we have to remember, you know, what we're hearing from other people who don't necessarily come to the board meetings as well. And so, I think we need to make sure that we're taking that into consideration.
Along with what the folks that have to deliver the education have to say too. I mean, they're in our community, but they're the folks that have to deliver, so. And I think that's equally important, that sitting in that room, at least from the administrators or the representatives that were in the room, there's a concern.
But if we go from high to substantial, I don't think that those concerns, I mean, do they express whether or not their concern would change when that drop?
That plan has been supported by the majority of stakeholders from the very get-go, and that was clearly communicated, especially with an asterisk that, things could change at substantial. So, I think that when those numbers get that low, we're talking under 100, we're talking positivity rate under 10%, so I think that makes people feel a lot more safer and comfortable. And the fact that our current dashboard, although, like I said, the weekend gives us a little bit of trouble, but I think we only have maybe five positive cases right now, which is a huge decline, yes, knock on wood. But if you want to vote on this, I would recommend that you do it next month where we can put an action.
Right now.
So we are respectful when you guys speak up here at the public comment. We don't yell at you and ask the same courtesy for when we're talking. We're trying to make a decision. Please have some respect.
Where it actually gets put on the agenda as an action item, and people are able to, spend the next few weeks making sure that their voices are heard. If you want to do a survey, I can do a survey. But I could communicate out to families, as soon as tomorrow that, with the current plan, we're moving substantial to all grade levels, K-12, being a recommended versus required. I would still like to use the language recommended. The health department has asked us to do that. That's what CDC and the associations ask, is that we use required, not optional, or recommended, not optional, if we are going that route. So, I could do that as soon as tomorrow. And so that way, if something does change in the next week, people are prepared for that.
We talk just a little, sorry.
I'm sorry, are you recommending to us now to have a consistent K through 12 to change to substantial for K through 8? Is that what
Yes, I can communicate that as early as tomorrow to families, that's what we're doing as far as, getting all on the same page, trying to unmask the younger kids even sooner, or at least make it a recommendation.
And again, that's 1B, correct?
That's 1B. That's the current plan, B, which is what was communicated, at the very beginning. And I'm okay with the board voting if that's what you want to do, but there's been a consensus that you don't need to do that. Our policy says you don't need to do that. That's been confirmed that, we don't need to do that. So, again, I'm open. It's just that that was the decision that we kind of made, so we would be able to kind of pivot if we needed to pivot, so.
Can we talk a little bit about the decision time? Because I know I'm probably being overly optimistic, but I could really see us dropping down in the next week or two. And I would hate to drop down to substantial and have to say, well, it's Monday, we have to wait till the following Monday to go to the next level. I don't have a perfect solution. Your scenario is a very good point that what you do if the kid goes to bed and they go to bed thinking they're wearing a mask the next day, and the next day there's a lot of confusion. I can see what that would cause stress on the parents. So I don't have a great...
8 o'clock is pretty late. I mean, the other thing is we could,
because that's when
I watch
the
it daily
information
anyways.
comes out. That's
Yes.
why they update it every
Yeah,
day.
I mean, and we could do a 24-hour turnaround, but, I did have a lot of parents say they were really upset in some of the decision-making as far as not having enough time. And this is something that, once we do become to a recommended, not required, that I think that families should have the opportunity to have those conversations. And it's kind of a quick turnaround, too. I mean, you got to understand that different signs go on the buildings. They have to prepare for, how, so if we're changing it, and that's the other thing is that, okay, so what if the numbers dip up just for a day? So that day we're back in masks. So, having a weekly kind of plan does help with a lot of that planning.
Can you remind me the difference between the number for high and substantial?
It's 100. 100 per 100,000
Is high.
is high.
And substantial?
I think it's 50.
Between 50 and 90.
50 and 99, yeah. So you drop below 50, you go down to moderate.
Which is already across the board recommended, not required.
The reality is, once we drop under 100 per 100,000, it would become mass.
Well, there's a positivity rate, so
That's
the risk is based on two metrics. It's based on the number of cases and then also the positivity rate.
So we're at about 16% positivity right now.
We need to be at 10.
But it dropped.
But from
20
30, it was
20.
30 then to, yeah.
So what you just said about the administrative task of all the signs on the buildings and making changes would be another reason that I would want to just make a decision, because it seems like a lot of work to have to run around and put signs back up and, be making changes if our numbers do this, which they easily could. And I also appreciate what you said about parents preparing their kids and not just, if we made a decision tonight to not mask, giving people an opportunity to have those conversations does seem fair and appropriate. So when I said I wouldn't just randomly pick a date for picking a date, that doesn't mean that I wouldn't support picking a date and giving people time to have those conversations with their kids so they knew what to expect. That said, I will reiterate that I don't need to wait until the next meeting, but I don't think that I am speaking for the majority. So.
I just, we didn't have it as an action item, and I did tell families that wanted to show up that, that we weren't planning on acting, but the board can do what the board, wants. My recommendation is that I at least communicate out tomorrow that, we've had conversations, this is deciding where we are, and then also that the current plan would move to a K-12 recommended at substantial. And again, my preference is to communicate that out on a Sunday night for the following week, but I'm open to doing, daily communication.
But in the communication, can't you also tell them to prepare and have conversation in the off chance where it's substantial next week, like this is a change?
Yes.
Can we just tell people now we should start having those conversations so that people are prepared?
Mm-hmm.
I think that would help in the communication with that change, just so people are ready.
So are we thinking that we'll change, that I would send out communication as,
I mean, I
As
still
it
think from an
changes?
administrative point, I would favor doing the weekly, because I just think that just makes more sense. I think from a bandwidth perspective, having you try to change a policy every single day if it flip-flops is a nightmare. I would not support.
and here's the
that.
thing, is like we've been at a certain place, so I think that once we get to substantial, that's kind of where we'll be, and then we'll get to moderate, and that's where we'll, kind of where we'll be. And so my fear is that we would flip more as if we're doing it daily than if we're doing it kind of weekly and we have those 7-day averages.
Yeah, I mean, that's what we did last year. I mean, John met with the health department on Fridays, and they made a recommendation on whether we were gonna have school next week, or we were gonna have virtual school, or what it was gonna be. So I think, even though it's not great for everybody, people are kind of used to that weekly communication, and I think that would be beneficial to just be very clear, here's what we're doing, and go from there. I mean, I'd even support that going out on Friday as opposed to Sunday. I know that that's hard with some of those numbers, but
I think that's why, is because we've been hopeful that
Yeah,
at
I get it.
some point soon, we're gonna hit that number,
Yes.
and so it's like, it's a Sunday night, look at the data from Saturday. Okay. That's the task force, who's here from the task force, but thanks for serving. Appreciate it. All right. Everybody wrapped up? Okay. All right. Public communications for item on the agenda. Practice of the Board of Education from that person in the audience to make statements concerning agenda items at this time. Please complete a public comment form if you haven't done so already. Return it to the desk. Looks like Brad has it in his hand. Public comment is limited to 3 minutes, and no person may speak more than once. We have a full room here tonight, so I just ask everyone to be respectful of that 3-minute time. Who's up, Brad?
All right, I do have 3 of you that hadn't checked an agenda item or non-agenda item, so I'm going to put you in the non-agenda item at the end, if that's all right. So, so the first one is James, sorry, misspoke, it's in the wrong file. Michelle Lutra. Should be.
Maybe it's not, I don't think it's on.
I'll start my 3 minutes until I can get this on.
No, I think it's,
That's fair.
is it, you see like?
It might just be.
Hello?
Yeah, I think this is
YouTube.
Okay, I don't care, I'll talk about it. Okay, the first thing I'd like to say, first of all, Michelle Utrip, 12831 Ontonagon Drive, DeWitt. So the first thing I'd like to say is that Craig was amazing, and I think that is a huge loss to our community and to our schools, and he will be missed dearly. I think most of you know me. I'm a huge supporter and advocate for our schools and for our community. I told my daughters that I'd be going to a school board meeting tonight, and they both said, "Mom, please don't go. I don't want you to embarrass me." And I said, I would never do that. Now, your dad, on the other hand, that's a different story. I was on the PTA as vice president and president for many years. I am on the school curriculum committee, but have had a difficult time making the meetings due to scheduling difficulties, and I'm sorry. I am now transitioning over to the Booster Club. I'm here tonight to talk about the mental health of our children. In 2020, we experienced something that our generations have never come across. We face and are still facing an invisible enemy. Many of us have lost loved ones, including myself. Over the past 2 years, we have lived in fear. We have ingrained in our children that COVID is deadly. And yes, it can be deadly, and it is real. We have ingrained in our children, and actually most adults, that a cough, sniffle, or runny nose is probably COVID. I can't tell you how many times I have coughed in public by having a tickle in my throat or drinking some water and having it go down the wrong pipe, and I come out having a hacking coughing attack. And the only thing I can think of is who's around me, and I need to let them know that it's not COVID. It's sad, and it's not a way to live. For the past 2 years, we have covered our faces, we have hidden our smiles. We have decreased our ability to engage and interact with each other. We have limited our critical thinking skills and cognitive abilities. We have instilled fear, especially in our children. We have masked, quarantined, isolated, and tested relentlessly for 2 years. COVID will be with us forever, and it's how we deal with it that's most important. I'm asking for this board to set a date of February 28th to allow masks to be optional in DeWitt Public Schools. Now, optional is the key word. I'm an individual that likes to read studies and data, but I'm most interested in reading the studies 5 to 10 years from now and how COVID and masking has affected our children and their mental health. I believe those studies will be alarming and will show a huge increase in anxiety, depression, suicide, medication, therapy, speech and language deficits, and continue on. We have followed the science and the experts for the past 2 years. It's time to start living again and stop living in fear. It's time to start seeing smiles, reading lips, not having to ask somebody, what did you say? Because you can't hear what they said through a mask. It's time to let our children breathe. It's time to stop the daily headaches that my daughter has when she comes home from school every day because she wears glasses, a mask, and looks at a computer, and the pressure behind her ears is horrible. If the board agrees that masking can be optional, I wouldn't be surprised if kids still continue to wear them, and that's okay. Because what would happen is we've trained them that to get a COVID test if they have a runny nose or a cough. Many of these kids, if they didn't have a mask, would probably feel lost. They probably would feel naked, and they'd feel weird. And that's okay. If they want to wear a mask, they can. I am asking you now, after 2 years of following the science and listening to the experts on COVID, to start listening to the experts on our children. I'm the expert on what I feel is best for my children, mentally and physically. Either way you look at this, we're all in a situation that's tough. I do not envy your position, but I'm asking for your help in this. I already have anxiety just listening to the presentation regarding quarantining, this level, that level. I want it done, and I know we all do, but this is going to be with us forever. So on that end, I would just like to say thank you very much for letting me speak tonight. And again, thank you for everything that you guys do for DeWitt schools and our kids.
Thank you.
Steven Spitter.
So we've decided, I've heard this tonight, I've heard one-way masking works, right? We've decided that's a thing now. In the beginning, we didn't believe that. Everybody had to have a mask on, right? We've decided that vaccines are safe and effective, even for kids down to 6 months now. Everybody's had the opportunity to get their vaccines. Everybody's had the opportunity, well, or they've gotten COVID, right? And they've got natural immunity. We've got all these things. We've got the trending of the data now. Like we didn't have that before. We have all these things that we had now that we didn't have 2 years ago. I mean, we've got our neighbors to the north, right there, St. John's, where they didn't have mandatory masks, and nothing devastating happened up there the whole time. So, you know, whether we trend up and down a little bit here or there, I think it's kind of irrelevant at this point. Like we're so far ahead of where we were before that, you know, give these kids the chance, give these parents a chance to make their own choices, to make their own recommendations. I mean, I don't see the reason, if we're gonna have our neighbors in the community, our kids are leaving school. My kid wears a mask about 5 seconds after they walk out of the doors here. And then we go to Meyer, and we go everywhere that we're gonna normally go. And you know what, regardless of vaccination status or anything, my kid hasn't had COVID. I mean, she's either gonna get it or she's not. I don't think whether she's vaccinated, whether she's not, none of that stuff matters anymore. You know, it's a personal risk. It's like getting in your car to come to this board meeting. I'm accepting that risk. Some people die in car accidents, some people don't. It's life, it's risk acceptance. I don't see a reason to slow roll and wait another month and then do a survey and then see what the numbers are at again. I mean, we've been strung along for 2 years. And I'm not saying by this board, but I mean by the world. Remember 2 weeks to flatten the curve? We're 2 years from that. But yeah, I mean, I don't see why we want to slow roll that. And I would urge the board to vote tonight on a date and say, hey, you know what, I understand. You don't want to tell them, hey, tomorrow you kids, you don't have to wear masks. Those kids, it's already ingrained in their minds. So give them a couple weeks. What Michelle said with the 28th, giving them a couple weeks to kind of get it, that gives families plenty of time to talk about what they're going to do at school and how it's going to go. Plenty of times for people to take signs down. That all makes sense to me. You know, we've had so many changes throughout the last couple of years where, you know, things where you just look at it and you're just, it's so nonsensical that my daughter's wrestling on the mat without a mask and the parents are required to wear a mask in the stand. It's, you know, it's insanity. I have to wear a mask out when I'm watching my daughter run cross country. I mean, it's crazy. I think we're at the point where more people are ready to have a choice. I mean, we want to raise our children to not be blind followers. We want them to have those critical thinking skills, and we need to start teaching that. And we're at a downward trend, and I think we're at the point where it's time to be done. Thank you.
Clay Cooey?
Stuttered. It's Coey. I agree with you half the time. You can't get my name right, man.
I'm working on
I'm
it.
taking that hair. Alrighty. Happy Valentine's Day, board. As soon as this portion of the communication of the agenda ends, and I'm going to change gears. I know what everybody's going to be talking about after me. More eloquently, probably, but probably not as loud. But the next point of agenda will be the board trustee vacancy. It's coming up. With that said, and I was here for the first portion of the meeting, listening to the interviews, but I wish to address those 3 candidates that were interviewed. To whomever is fortunate enough to be appointed to fill this vacancy, I'm going to ask you one favor. Address and speak with respect to this town, to these people, to these taxpayers. Respect them enough to speak and answer from your heart, not your brain, not your liberal academia trained mind. We asked you a question in a Meyer. Mr. Hanselman brought this up eloquently. 3 of 17 of you got interviewed. 14 of us didn't. Shocker. That means we didn't get to answer those questions, but we can, and we will. and we're going to ask them of you in Meyer, respectfully. Respect these people's opinions out here. Because of the 3 of you that were interviewed, I haven't seen yet one meeting in the last 3 months. Yet I've seen 50 faces here every month. COVID or not. We show up. Showing up is half the battle. So I suggest you take Mr. Hanselman's question to heart as to how will you address a concerned parent in a Meyer, because it will happen. I guarantee it. Answer from your heart, not your brain all the time. This science stuff that you hide behind, these made-up facts, this is not the match game 1976 where you're trying to match Gene Rayburn's questions to Brett Summers' answer. Or Richard Dawson. Usually he'll play with you. But you respect and you listen, even when someone's on the opposite side. Jason and I don't agree 100% of the time. Trey Montana, maybe 10% of the time. Shanna, you and I, 0% of the time. And I ain't afraid to say it. But that doesn't mean that we can't work together. That's what we have to do. You hear all sides. I want to thank you, Lisa, and thank you, Brad, for speaking up tonight. It's about time you reached down and found some. When she gives you that, you didn't use it. Or I will. I'll run against you and boot you out, as will 14 other ones that didn't get an interview as well. Shocker, and I wonder why. But anybody who wishes to challenge my resolve, or the resolve of those that show up and question authority, as we should be raising our children to do as well, in the face of extreme edicts, illegal tactics, those are the kind of leaders that you want, not lemmings. So thank you for speaking up, you two. I appreciate your efforts. But if you wish to challenge my resolve, I will give you 2 simple words. Try me. That's it, Fort Pitt. Those 3 candidates, welcome to the snake pit.
Just a reminder, it's 3 minutes. What I'll do going forward is I'll let you know at least 15 seconds before, so you have an idea to wrap it up. Danielle Fell.
Thank you all for the opportunity to speak tonight. I want to start by saying that I've been attending the Board of Education meetings consistently over the last year. My child is in 1st grade, and we specifically chose to move to DeWitt for the schools. I can honestly say that my husband and I regret the decision. We regret the decision to build our home and move our family to this community. We continue to debate pulling our child from this DeWitt public school and putting her in a private school setting or putting our brand new house up for sale and moving. I used to say that I was glad my child was young during this pandemic, being in 1st grade. But then again, this was when we were told just 2 weeks to slow the curve. Well, 2 years, not 2 weeks later. That's no longer the case. I'm very sad and concerned for my 1st grade child. These are some of the most important years as she develops basic skills that will be the foundation for her future. Learning to pronounce words, read, understand facial cues, body language, reading emotions, and basic interacting with friends, just to name a few. Now, we listened to the Director of Curriculum today. K through 1, just in those few slides, I noticed that the SRE data is worse than the overall average of DeWitt Public. Can't help but wonder, is this part of it? Thank you, Lisa, for asking. What did the data look like prior to the pandemic? I'd be curious. I would love to see that information. This is all on top of her never meeting her 1st grade DeWitt public school teacher. And she never will. My daughter's teacher took maternity leave at the start of the school year, as often occurs. She was expected to return back in November, then pushed back to January. On December 31st, we were notified that she had extended her leave through the remainder of the school year, leaving my child with a permanent sub, not a permanent teacher, a permanent sub for the entire 21-22 school year. Again, never meeting her 1st grade teacher. Now, please don't get me wrong. Excuse me. I am completely grateful for our permanent substitute. I am thrilled that she was not only available, but willing to stick with this 1st grade classroom for the entire year. As someone who is not a teacher, just like our substitute, I could not imagine stepping into this role with no support from the teacher that chose not to teach her classroom for the entire year. Just another way we've been led down by this district. As far as masking, I have so much to say. So much was brought up tonight. This is the most conversation I've heard about masking at all of these Board of Education meetings. Thank you. I am not anti-mask. I want to make that clear. I know COVID is real, and I pray for those that have been and will continue to be negatively affected by COVID. I am, however, personal pro-choice. So much has changed since the creation of this day of school tiered mask plan. I thank you. I thank the team for that 1B tweak as recommended. Now that vaccinations are required for that younger age. If you guys do nothing else tonight, I hope that recommendation is passed tonight.
15 seconds.
I'm still not sure how one is not affected by COVID after the final bell has rung. If your survey stats were a true depiction of how the community feels, then after-school activities would not be filled with unmasked parents, unmasked teachers, unmasked coaches, unmasked players, and unmasked spectators. However, time after time, this is not the case. I see pictures of my child in class, fully masked, all while those attending sporting events, after-school activities, and events, all DPS-sponsored, unmasked. Not to mention walking through the mire, going to any restaurant or evening activities held throughout DeWitt. I am still shocked to see the numbers, yet the day-to-day activities around our community, clearly, people are not masked. You, the board, need to step up and realize that our children are being negatively affected by these policies. We face the unthinkable prospect of a generation left behind both academically and socially. All I'm asking is therefore no longer to be a requirement, but a recommendation. Thank you. I know I went over my time.
Amber Warner.
I didn't really make one. I didn't think I was going to be here. It says on there that I am for setting a date, February 28th.
Okay. Have that collected. Thanks, Amber. Well, I apologize ahead of time. The checkup round?
Oh, sorry, I just kind of scrolled my
Yeah, sorry, Chelsea. Man, I wouldn't get Chelsea out of that. Sorry about that. Yeah.
All right. I want to start out by saying thank you to everyone who had comments tonight, specifically Brad and Lisa. Most of my comments tonight are directed at those of you who continue to act in bad faith. I don't always agree with the rest of you, but disagreement is healthy and fine when you're reasonable, interested, and honest. The MASB document about traits of an effective board that was suggested to applicants of the open seat said this: be aware of the community and staff's perceptions of the board. If the board is perceived as being unethical, dishonest, secretive, or self-serving, whether justified or not, that will become reality for the community and staff. Consider how stakeholders might interpret your behaviors and decisions and act accordingly. This community perceives the board as dishonest and self-serving. The discussion tonight about the vote was a perfect example. Mr. Tramontana, at the last meeting, you expressed your annoyance that parents come here to speak up for their otherwise voiceless children, rather than for the teachers, who are already the beneficiaries of one of the most powerful and well-funded lobbying bodies in the nation. You said plenty of other things I'd like to get into as well, but since Mr. Hanselman is going to insist on enforcing a 3-minute rule he knows is a lie, I'm stuck giving only my conclusion, which is that you are as willing as Shanna to sacrifice truth and consistency in favor of whatever is politically desirable to you in the moment. Speaking of Shanna, last night you once again abused your power by inflicting mandatory masking on the entire district, despite a tidal wave of science, which you claim to follow and respect, coming out heavily against you in the last week alone. Everyone in this room understands the lay of this land. There is a very real feeling in this community of distrust and suspicion of this board, fueled by a lack of honesty and transparency on all kinds of issues, and the hypocrisy of your willingness to enforce dubious rules against us while yourselves having no regard for any rule or law that restricts your own conduct. It is contemptuous, destructive, and just like the mandatory masking, it needs to end. Stop making this about winning some battle. We couldn't stop your mandate, we can't make you follow your own rules, we can't even get some of you to look at us while we're talking. But it's not just us anymore. Counties and districts all over the state are repealing their mandates. Data released in just the last few days shows that DeWitt, with its required masking, has double the cases of St. John's, who made masks optional. There's science in those numbers, but it doesn't say what you're insisting it says. There's a chance here to mend some of the toxicity in this community if you abandon the insistence on dictates and control, which didn't work anyways. Forget a sunset date, vote to lift the mandate here and now and forever, and let the parents and the community decide. Thank you.
Michaela Smith.
Good evening, everyone. Kayla Smith, DeWitt Township taxpayer. It is fitting that February has Groundhog Day because I kind of feel like movie Groundhog, where we're just stuck in a perpetual conversation surrounding one overall theme. So as such, I'm going to read what I've read with the school board in the past. The mission statement. DeWitt Public Schools are preparing students for the challenges and opportunities of a global society. Vision statement. By joining together with our community and families, we will provide an environment of excellence that results in the achievement of all students. At the heart of these statements, both of them, are the students and the families and the community, not the teachers union, not the administrators, our children. And once again, just like Groundhog Day, respectfully asking that the board do the right thing for the children in this community. Please make a motion tonight to vote on making masks optional. Put the parents back in the driver's seat where they belong. Thank you.
Thank you. Will Thompson.
I'm breaking the rules because I have 2 items, but I know I can only speak once. First item is I respectfully request that the board works with both the city of DeWitt and DeWitt Township so that we do not have overlap between the meetings of these 3 groups. It's very unfortunate that people have to make the decision between township board meeting or city council meeting and this meeting. So please, if you could look into that, I would appreciate it. Secondly, I want to thank whoever allowed me to be on the task force to talk about COVID precautions and masking. It's been a great experience hearing all the different opinions. I certainly appreciate Superintendent Spickard and the presentation. She tried to capture very diverse opinions, which there certainly were, and I appreciate DeWitt's comments as well to try to clarify that. With that, I want to mention, because I think it makes a lot of difference, is that the task force really can't keep up with how the world is changing. The task force met on February 7th, and hopefully most of you know, but on February 10th, the Ingham County Health Department met and decided they would rescind their mask mandate and rescind their quarantine and isolation procedures for close contacts. Been talking about that a long time. We shouldn't be quarantining healthy people, period. And here, Ingham County, our closest county, larger county, has done such. The very next day, February 11th, Wayne County, Oakland County, and Washtenaw County, absolutely huge counties. And I certainly wouldn't put Washtenaw County as a conservative county, but even they announced they would no longer require masks effective February 28th. In addition, Antrim, Charlevoix, Emmett, Otsego, Benzie, and Leelanau will be rescinding their mask mandates February 17th. None of these were available when the options came up for discussion at the task force, and all should be considered. If you look at the cases and hospitalizations in the state, many of you talked about locally. As a state, we've dropped 91% in cases, from over 20,000 to 1,794 on Monday. That should be great news. We should be celebrating. Hospitalizations are down over 56%. In addition, Clinton County, the only school districts that are requiring masks are DeWitt and Bath. The rest do not. So a lot of data, a lot of things that would point us in the direction that it's time. I wholeheartedly agree with Michelle when she addressed the mental health issues. As I look back, I wonder, why did we ever mask our kids? But it's pretty apparent to me. Emotion overcame reason. We wanted to do something. And I think that's a great thing. We all care about our teachers. We all care about our kids. But the data just isn't backing up that it did much of anything. The time to ask masking is long overdue. There's no way to justify continuing it. I'm asking the board to support the superintendent and recommending we set a date. I'll say February 21st. I'd be fine with the 28th. I understand we need to give people some notice. We all know the cases are going to drop. I think that waiting the other way, we just aren't going to know until right before it happens for option 1A or 1B. If I had a choice of 1A or 1B, I'd say 1B. Let's make it the same for the whole school. What's the difference? We have vaccines for everybody. There's really no differentiation, so thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. That's it, other than the 3 that I just put in the other.
You guys want to make a comment, or you good keep rolling?
I'm one of the 3 I wanted to speak on that. Robert Lovell.
Yep, all right, we got you.
All right.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you very much. Again, I'll be pretty brief. I just wanted to speak and voice my support for getting rid of the mask requirements and I guess making it optional. It seems like it's pretty much a foregone conclusion at this point from everything we're seeing in all the surrounding areas and everything that's going on. So, and definitely I think the negative impacts of the mask to our kids, especially the young ones, is, you know, it's apparent. And I mean, continuing on with this is just, it's just worse. So, if it were up to me, I'd want to lift it tonight, but understanding there may need to be some time, I fully support, you know, a date, at least set a date, please, so that our kids can have that option and families can choose. Thank you.
And it is about masks.
I say so was mine.
Okay, so Michelle Phelan?
Yeah.
All right.
Good evening. So what I wanted to speak about is still about masks, but it's completely changed from listening to you and what could possibly happen from this day forward. I think that some of the conversation is going to have to be a little bit swift in the way of thinking how people are treated, how teachers are going to treat kids that aren't wearing masks, or students treating people that don't wear masks. I think there's definitely going to be some bullying, but it's going to be a challenge. I would love you, Sunny, as a representative for the schools to commit to putting together a task force at the school, because I understand that when kids, you know, a mask slips down underneath their nose, I think that we don't really need police for that. So when they do come off, and those students that do choose to take them off, there should not be any repercussion for them. And I would love to see you have that. So, again, I think we're gonna have a whole new set of issues, and I think that if there's bullying or things being said by teachers or kids at school, there should be some swift actions for that. And I appreciate that we're moving forward on this, I do. And I appreciate all of you and your time.
Thank you. Chelsea Brown?
Oh, I already went.
No? So you had 2 in you?
Well, I commented at the previous meeting.
Oh, that's part of it.
You have 2, I think, more than one.
All the others are as non-agenda items.
You can put I was masked. I'm Kelly Nuttaway.
Yeah, I am too.
I guess that would be this.
All right, Kelly Nuttaway.
Okay. Hello, Kelly Nuttaway from Ovid LC. I'm just here to support Parents' Choice on mask. And just want to kind of remind you again that, you know, these masks do decrease the amount of oxygen that is in the lung tissues and the amount of oxygen that goes to your brain. I don't know if any of you guys have heard, but there was a young boy, I think he's 17, from Middleton, Michigan, and his name was Xander, and he developed a medical condition from wearing those masks. After basketball practice, he went home and he basically collapsed. And
basically the medical condition was a muscle spasm that he has in his head now that pounds loudly all day. It made me really worried when you were talking about the one running in cross country, and I really think you guys really need to think about not all just the medical part of this. I mean, I don't think we want any kid to be harmed in anything, and there is a lot of, this parent reached out and has been lashed on social media. You're lying, everything like that. She's got the proof of records. But a lot of people aren't knowing any of this stuff because nobody can say anything before they're basically booted out on Facebook or whatever it is, however they're trying to reach out to people. But, I mean, you've enforced these mandates, and I would think you've been able to see from other schools. I'm over at Elsie. You guys have no more or less than what I have, and we have not had masks on since day one. You keep talking about, and I keep getting, I don't understand that you're like, okay, well now everybody's vaccinated, everybody can do this, so now we can release this. I don't get why vaccinated makes any difference, because I can tell you at least 200 plus people that are vaccinated, I can tell you got COVID. So what does it really mean? I just feel like you guys are just making excuses and excuses as I've gone to these board meetings over and over, and been just as frustrated as these parents not even having to have to deal with it with my kid. And I am going to tell you, when our school did come back and had no mask, my daughter, I think I said at the first board meeting, was, had a boy reach out to her and, you know, take things from her because she wasn't vaccinated. So you will see this kind of stuff. I did not have anything to do with the mask. They never said anything that, you know, this one didn't wear a mask, this one did, nobody. I never heard that. But the vaccination thing, I did hear a lot at my school. So hopefully you guys are going to be better at that. One thing I wanted to give you, just some pointers. You were talking about substitute teachers and having problems. Maybe lifting the mask mandate might help people want to come into your school and substitute teach. I know me, I help with my school, but if my school had masks, there's no way I would consider helping. If I don't believe in it, why am I going to subject myself to it? But I also told my kids and didn't let my kids get subjected to it.
15 seconds.
Last thing was also too, just to let you know, our school pays $125 for their substitute teachers. And I know we're in kind of a farm community, so maybe you do need to raise your rates a little bit. And to end with, COVID-19 is not your enemy. Fear is. You will not die one day sooner than, or one day later than God has planned for you. But He did not create you to live in fear. The Bible said God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and of love and a sound mind. And just to let you know, Omicron and Delta, actually, if you put those words together, you can actually make it say media control.
James Renner. Appreciate the active debate. This is how the public wants the school boards to act. Okay, it is not behind closed. By the way, this is not operating, so I'm gonna put it down.
It's the feed for the live stream. It's not for the.
It doesn't work. So this is how the public wants to see you folks work. Actively debate, be of differing opinions, but come to conclusions. Okay. Hopefully that doesn't count for my 3 minutes. What I wanted to do today was talk about, there's an active public debate about the role of the parent in the school system. Recently, on January 15th, a political party in the state of Michigan stated that the client of the school is not the parent, but the entire community, the public. Who is the public? I won't go there, okay? But this runs counter to the section 380.1 of the revised school code, which states, that's for the state of Michigan, it is the natural and fundamental right of parents and legal guardians to determine and direct the care, teaching, and education of their children. The public schools of this state serve the needs of the pupils by cooperating with the pupils' parents and legal guardians to develop the pupils' intellectual capabilities and vocational skills in a safe and positive manner. What has transpired with this mask mandate is not safe. It has proven it is not. Schools like St. John's and other schools have not had it. They have not been adversely affected. Entire states have had it. They've not been adversely affected. But a positive manner, there are more negatives associated with masks than positives. I think that's a proven fact now. It's anecdotal, but it's also a positive fact. So I strongly recommend you make a decision tonight. I advise a private board of directors and 2 companies. They made, once they got data, they made decisions then. They did not drag. Because once this information gets out to the public, that it may happen, it may not happen, why didn't they do it? It begins to undermine the credibility of you sitting here in your decision-making process. So my recommendation, make the date 2 weeks from now, 3 weeks from now, whatever. Provide guidance to children, because there are now classes of children in your school system. Those that are firmly believing in the mask mandate, those that don't. And you have to have behavioral guidelines as to how you're going to deal with that. Thank you. I really appreciated the debate.
Thank you.
Mr. Stoddard, do you want to move me into the agenda item kind of period too, please?
Adam Howard.
Thank you. I've got a prop with me here tonight. I wanted to make this really easy since you have such a difficult time with words like the board shall adopt policies, or board approval must be obtained for all rules or regulations which might involve litigation, or the school board must seek and take into account public comment in developing and revising its safe return to in-person instruction plan, or no participant may speak more than once on the same topic, or each statement made by a participant shall be limited to 3 minutes. So I brought a big graph illustrating your complete and utter failure to control the spread of COVID. You see here, here is where the last remaining third of idiotic schools imposing mask mandates on children under threat of punishment achieved the highest COVID transmission rates in the state. Mind you, that was before the highly infectious cloth mask evading Omicron surge. Oddly, this chart hasn't been updated to include that data. To be fair, the graph doesn't take into account all the varying circumstances from district to district, so let's drill into the COVID metrics DeWitt has achieved under the sole authority of Superintendent Spickard, who in her infinite wisdom and under her great hand has bestowed upon us science and evidence-based solutions to control community transmission of COVID, namely by threatening the punishment of children if they expose their noses and illegally removing uninfected kids from school, lying about the health department's involvement. We mustn't forget the countless hours, resources, and attention that you focused into this effort. Really, this war the superintendent has declared against COVID, with our children conscripted as her little masked soldiers. No cost was too high, not the lost instruction time, not the constant disruptions to the learning environment, not the punitive mask culture, not the reputation of the school, not the bad press, not the attorney's fees, not the social development of our youngest learners. And for all of that, you're reporting 638 school-associated cases. My God, that's 20% of the entire school population in under 6 months. I don't think you could achieve those kind of numbers if maximizing infections was the goal. But let's take a look at a comparable school to be sure. How have those free-breathing heathens next door in St. John's fared? With nearly identical enrollment in the same geographic area, without a mask mandate, surely they must have suffered case rates far in excess of those controlled by our almighty superintendent. 303. Less than half. Wow. You don't get to disclaim responsibility after anointing yourself the great protector of public health. You failed in every conceivable way. We'll never forgive and never forget. This young generation will forever remember what you did to them, what you took from them, treating them as dirty little vectors of disease, and that it was all a sick farce, a disgusting clown show orchestrated by you. Your only chance of redemption is to immediately end it all tonight. Read the writing on the wall. It's over.
I believe that's all.
Do we want to break? Do we want to keep rolling? Let's keep rolling. All right. Next agenda item is discussion about the board trustee vacancy. We've already had some discussion in our work session this afternoon, immediately following the interviews. Brad, I think you mentioned potentially just a straw poll at some point of some sort. I mean, do we want to start there? Do we want to have further discussion before we get there? I know we have to have a roll call vote. That's later on the agenda.
Yeah, I'm perfectly comfortable with that.
Or do I have more discussion first? Are there other things? We had a pretty decent short discussion in the work session.
Comfortable with straw poll.
Okay.
I'm so glad that wasn't me. I'm like, so much fun.
Are you keeping score down there, Brad? Is that what you're?
Oh,
no, okay.
We're only doing straw poll, right?
Yeah.
Not a vote. It's just still considered discussion. Is that correct?
Correct. So I'm happy to go first. Honestly, these are the two we have. It kind of narrowed it down to a discussion are both just fantastic candidates. I'm leaning towards Angelina Barnes at this point.
I'm happy to go second. I would agree that both were great candidates, and I'll save my discussion comments for discussion, but I'm leaning towards Gina.
I'm happy to go. I agree, Jason, that just two great people, but I would just give a small leg up to Angelina right now after beginning of this discussion.
I'll go next. I concur. We do have the fortunate task of looking at two really good candidates. Right now, my vote is for Angelina.
I can go with Angelina right now.
I would agree with Lisa, with Gina.
Seems to be it.
I would just like to point out, I thought the person that pointed out what stood out with Gina, both were great, and certainly Angelina is well-trained and understands board rules and guidance, and she's an attorney and all that's wonderful. Gina brought a perspective that we don't have on the board. You know, we have Jason, you're an attorney, we've had other attorneys on the board, but Gina's answers were so inclusive, and she didn't just focus on one issue area. She covered a lot of ground. She was very informed, and she talked about post-pandemic concerns, and that's a big deal. And being invested in the community as a business owner, being a parent of a child with special needs, I just think that she brings something when we talk about having a diverse board, diversity of thought. She brings diversity in a way that Angelina doesn't. Clearly, Angelina is very qualified, but we talked about that being something that was important to us, and Gina really stood out in her answers in that area. I would be curious to know what the differentiators were with Angela, that, you know, somebody...
Angelina?
Yes, I'm sorry. Thank you, Dwight. Angelina. You know, what would draw you to her as your number one candidate?
Well, you never have too many lawyers on the board. We had 3 when I started, now it's just me, so. No, look, it was a real, I'm very, I could go either way. I think we really couldn't go wrong with either of these candidates. I agree with you, and I really like Gina a lot. I thought I agree with you on the diversity she brings to the board in terms of some things we don't have on the board. You know, I like Angelina's responses to a handful of the questions. I liked her approach, her analytical approach. She outlined that process on 2 different questions, which I really like, because that's a lot of how, maybe it's just because I can relate to that, that's how I think through an issue, and I thought that was how she explained it, how she would approach questions that come before the board. But they're both just great people.
I would just add, when I look at it, I look at trying to figure out what are we lacking and what are we missing from Craig. And Craig was a really great board member who understood board governance, who understood context, everything like that. So what really just put Angelina slightly ahead for me was the fact that she understands board governance, she knows how boards work, she can come in from day one and immediately be able to do things without a learning curve. And so that is really the only thing that separated the two for me. trying to figure out what have we lost. And even though we'll never be able to replace Greg, how can we come up with some of the skills that he brought as closely as possible?
I mean, I would echo a lot of those things. I think going into a strategic planning process like we are, I mean, I think having somebody that understands how the board's going to operate, and I think that's just, it's going to be key in the months moving forward.
So I guess I'm the only one that hasn't spoken in response to your question. I think that, as been stated, I don't think we could really go wrong in either direction that we could choose for these two candidates out of the three. I think that there were some things that Angelina shared in her responses to some of the questions that made me think about, as the new guy, right, how we kind of operate, the perception of how we operate, and how that could be a little different. And I think how we operate as a board is important in terms of perspective to this community, because the reality is that perception does become reality, even though that people might not have all the facts that we have on situations and circumstances. And I thought she presented some things that made me think about how we could be stronger as a board. And not that Gina didn't do that too. I just think Angelina presented some of those things better, as I think about it.
So Heather, do you want to weigh in at all? Well, you know, it is difficult when you have great candidates for both aspects. And I took a lot of notes on Angelina's board experience, and it was actually some of the notes that I made as we went through the resumes as well. You know, as I looked at Gina, there were, much as Lisa has identified, I also was looking at us as a board and the number of us of kids, children in the school district across multiple schools. And I listened to John in a prior conversation he and I had, and making sure we have a representation of someone on the board that is across all of the schools. I mean, I think that becomes very important. I mean, a few of us, we got kids in high school, we kind of know what's going on over there before probably sometimes Jody might know. But the other schools, you know, I think that's where it becomes really helpful for us from a perspective of the board. What are some of the challenges in those schools? We get the opportunity to hear from the parents when they're at the board meeting, but from fellow board members. That's how somewhat I looked at it. The other aspect of Gina's is the experience she had with special ed. And that was one part for me. I have to look at somebody else. I know when John was here, we had a lot of discussions around special ed needs. I had some discussions with parents that actually have their children in a different school district. They live here, but their children go to a different school district because our special ed isn't as good as another school. So that's how I looked at those pieces. I really had to separate the board experience. I mean, because the way we operate as a board, or the way the school board is different than other boards that I participate in. So I think there is some semblance of similarity, but it really becomes a little bit different on that piece. I mean, would it be nice if we had 8 seats up here and take a vote? Yeah, absolutely would. I think there's responses and the approach that Angelina had that I really liked. From, I'd say, a technical standpoint or that analyzation standpoint, the listen, learn, analyze type of approach. But I still continue to come back to, you know, Gina, you know, participation, and although I appreciate Angelina pointing that out when I knew she was part of the band as well, is Gina participating with the curriculum. I mean, that's not a fun group. Speaking from, you know,
no offense,
experience, no offense, Brian, but it's tough because you're trying to help a direction in that, and you know, I applaud any parent that wants to participate. Anyone's interested to see Brian, I'm sure he'd like a few more of you sitting in that group. But where I stood, I still felt with Gina, looking across, again, multiple schools, she brings a different perspective, unlike the board, a perspective that none of us, I think, can really address as a board member.
Any more discussion? after 2 hours and 10 minutes, you're up.
All right. For miscellaneous, DeWitt High School had a shelter-in-place drill on Wednesday, January 19th. Senior interviews were held on Wednesday, January 26th. DHS had 2 snow days during the winter storm on February 2nd and 3rd. Quotes were read on announcements from historical Black figures for Black History Month. And we had a COVID-related day off due to lack of substitutes. Clubs for musical, the DHS 2022 Benefit Cabaret was held on February 12th and 13th. Acting, they have Performing and Preparing Distracted, a DeWitt Theater Department Act As If production. NHS, they helped set up and run a blood drive on January 28th for the national blood shortages that are happening. They're sending Valentine's Day letters to pediatric patients in hospitals. And fleece blanket making and donating is coming up February 15th and 16th. Student government, they're working on awards and receiving awards. They're getting ready for states. And members Nicole L. and Paige T. are presenting on the Panther Pack at states. Academics, there was no school on January 17th, MLK Day. New semester started Tuesday, January 18th. There will be no school on February 21st for President's Day. And conferences will be held on Thursday, February 17th. Athletics, all athletic events on the snow days were postponed or canceled. Boys varsity basketball team had a huge win over Openness on January 29th. Boys varsity swim team held their senior night last Monday. Varsity girls gymnastics season has started. Varsity wrestling held their senior night January 26th. DHS has installed a new 34-foot score table in the main gym. And competitive cheer seniors took the mat for their last CAAC meet on February 9th.
So what do you think about the senior interviews? I heard about it from my house. What's your perspective on that?
They were good. Yeah, they weren't too scary as I thought. So,
Can you tell us, for people who don't know what that is?
yeah, so we have members from the community who are working for businesses and stuff. They come in and they do we do an interview day during school to help seniors get prepared to interview for future jobs or businesses, etc. And just basically they give feedback, and we get to hear ourselves talk, hear them talk to us, and we get great feedback on how we did and how to better ourselves. So.
Thank you. All right, on the consent agenda, it's a recommendation by Superintendent Shannon Spicker that the Board of Education approve, adopt, and accept the following items for immediate implementation. And appropriate action is presented. Approval of minutes from the January 10th, 2022 meeting, the January 19th, 2022 meeting, and the work session on February 7th, 2022. Treasurer's reports and bills for payment for the month of January 2022. The treasurer reviewed checks received, debits, and the purchase card for the month of January 2022. And then finally, to approve an overnight out-of-state trip for the DHS Business Professionals of America State Competition in Grand Rapids on March 10th through the 13th. Do we have a motion?
So moved. Support.
Any discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. The next item, again, I use this phrase a lot, but it is a heavy heart that we're doing this, so we have to the vice president accepted the presidency, so I became the president. There was a vacancy for my former position as the vice president spot. So I take a nomination for the office of vice president.
I would nominate John Tramontana for that vacancy.
Are there any other nominations? All right, nominations are closed. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, congratulations, John. So with John moving from being the treasurer to the vice president, we now have a vacancy at the spot of treasurer. Do we have any nominations for that?
I'd like to nominate Brad Weaver for treasurer.
Any other nominations? Nominations are closed. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. That's Brad. All right, it's a recommendation from Superintendent Shannon Spicker and the Assistant Superintendent Rob Spagnuolo that the DeWitt Board of Education approve the resolution for the 2022 school building and site bonds, Series 1 as presented. Do we have a motion?
So moved. Support.
Moved and supported. Any discussion? Rob, Sean,
We do have Frederick from Trim.
We could give you a minute update on
where everything went.
Yeah, sure. So, thank you, and I'll first say, kind of echoing some sentiments about
Hold on,
Craig.
Michelle, you can't close the door, it's an open meeting, sorry.
I knew Craig for 10 years, and it's kind of, it's tragic and frankly surreal to not see him here tonight. He was a beautiful soul. He wanted the best for everyone he met, even those who only known a short time. So, I don't know, I guess in the words of Forrest Gump, that's all I have to say about that. The resolution that you have before you tonight, it is a ratification resolution that ratifies and approves the administration's actions to sell the bonds, which are the first series of bonds from the November bond vote. And that resolution that was passed back in December, it delegated authority to Superintendent Spickford to sign the bond purchase agreement with Stiefel Nicholas, the underwriter for the bonds. Stiefel is a classic middleman. They underwrite bond issues. You sell the bonds to Stiefel. They then resell them to retail investors, investment houses, etc. So the resolution that you have before you ratifies and approves that bond purchase agreement and also everything that the administration did to get the bonds sold. And a few details about the bond issue. They were sold with a pretty significant premium, so a nearly $1 million premium. That premium was used to reduce the par amount of the bonds, so the principal amount, and was then used to fund the capital projects account, so that you have in the deposit of the capital projects fund is pretty close to what we had pegged for the par amount in the authorizing resolution, $8,685,000. So, yeah, that's kind of a Reader's Digest version of the authorizing resolution, and be happy to answer any questions that the board has.
Questions? Okay. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Okay, the recommendation by Superintendent Sean Spicker that the Board of Education award the 2022 Building and Site Capital Project the guaranteed maximum price number one contract to Clark Construction for construction management, staffing, and reimbursables as presented. Do we have a motion?
So moved. Supported. Pick one.
Moved and supported. Arts here?
Yes.
Yes.
Good evening. We want to expedite a little bit. We actually have item 9B. I had Dave Warren with Clark Construction Company here with me as well to answer anything as far as the next item. As you can see in your board packet, this is the extension of all the work that we had done prior to the January 10th board meeting. This is closes up all the work with Clark Construction for all their costs in front of the bond, short of each one of the individual projects. You'll see GMP item number 2, which is the turf and track field. The board will see bid tabs in detail for every single project that goes forward, as well as the associated fee that came through the bidding process.
Questions? I'm going to have you just stay here while we take care of the first one, because I think we may have some questions on the second one. Yep. All right. All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The recommendation by Superintendent Sean Speaker that the Board of Education award the 2022 Building and Site Capital Project to Clark Construction for guaranteed maximum price for the turf and track project in the amount of $2,016,734 as presented. Plan Rand Cressard and Clark Construction have provided recommendation letters for board review. Do we have a motion? So moved. Support. Moved and supported. Discussion. Questions. So, the big question, I think I've mentioned this before. As everyone asked me, this is one of those minor questions we talked about. When's the football field going to be done? Are we going to be done by fall? Yes. Okay.
We'll do it Friday. I don't recall. When's it going to start?
As soon as frost walls are off, because you're not on a Class A road. I can't start until frost walls are done and we can start excavating.
So as soon as the frost?
Around April, second week of April.
So here's just a general question then around graduation. Where's graduation going to be at?
In the gym. And traditionally, it's been in the gym, except for...
I understand, bigger class. So, but separate items.
It's a good question.
Timing should have been a little bit closer on that, I would have thought.
Well, I think you have to start it then to get it done in time, right? That's the issue, because I think that impacts some of our spring sports as well. Which
Yeah.
I know is an issue, and we're kind of trying to work through that, but there's no perfect solution if we want to have the field ready to play on come football season.
Were there some displacements too with other athletic, like with track and other things? What, has that been resolved? Do we know?
Yeah, so,
Home
so,
schedules?
yes, Mike has worked on
Okay.
all of the scheduling to make sure, yeah.
Other questions? Thanks for your patience. All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? So we talked about a few minutes ago, we had 3 candidates offered an interview tonight at 5 o'clock. We interviewed all of them. We have a recommendation before us that the Board of Education appoint someone to fill the open trustee position until December 31st, 2022. Do we have a motion?
Make a motion to appoint Angelina Barnes.
Support?
Support.
Moved and supported. Any further discussion? All in favor, please say aye. Actually, we need a roll call, never mind.
Do I hand spike?
Want an aye or yes?
Yes. Jason Hansman?
Yes.
Brad Stoddard? Yes. John Tramontano?
Yes.
Lisa Truscott? Brad Weaver?
Yes.
We have a vote.
Motion carries. Thank you all. It's the recommendation by Superintendent Shauna Spicker that the Board of Education approve the 2022-2023 DeWitt High School curriculum guide as presented. Do you have a motion?
So moved.
Support? Support. Moved and supported. Discussion, questions for Jody?
Can you just give us a quick?
I was gonna say, Jody can give you the Reader's Digest kind of update.
With the changes?
Yeah.
There's some changes to the language. We just try to streamline and make it a little bit more condensed. We have about 5 or 6 additional classes that we're going to be offering, all electives. I mean, that's essentially that in a nutshell. We've got intro to stats is what we're looking at. We have a horticulture, botany class. We have Jeff Crowley doing or looking at possibly running a wellness type class. Again, these are all determined based on numbers when students schedule.
So was there a change to the dual enroll? I was trying to understand, is it just a different explanation for the dual enrollment program?
So we're partnering with LCC, same thing, but they're called high school advantage programs. So they're a high school class, but you get dual enrollment credits. So you're buying the class, and it's a fixed rate of $7,000 with up to like 30 seats to it. So financially, it just makes more sense to go that route. And the 4 classes that we're looking at are the 4 highest classes that we've had taken in the past, historically speaking, with psych, social, micro, and macro econ. And those are all credit or all classes that would transfer as with your high school transfer agreement. So that's why we're going to try that this year. We're not looking at doing anything as far as additional courses with the Michigan transfer agreement because we want to be pushing our AP classes because sometimes the dual enrollment and the AP are competitive, with one another. So we want to push the AP classes still, but offer our students some more options.
Will it look the same? Will it still be an online model?
So what we're looking at doing is going to be probably more of a hybrid for those 4 classes. We have to work with LCC to determine how often that instructor could be in the building. But we feel like with our proximity to Lansing Community College and being on a block schedule, it would allow them to be in the building more often.
So they would come, because I know right now some students do go to LCC for some.
Very few, but most of the classes for dual enrollment are online, but with this, we're looking at a hybrid format.
And they would come to us?
They would come to us.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Jody, is the
GMCA?
Yeah, that's brand new.
I'm sorry?
Is that brand new?
Well, it is the first time we're offering it. So that's Greater Michigan Construction Academy, and that's located on the south side of Lansing. And we're really trying to push for those students that are looking at a trades, because it can lead to a job down the line. It could be an apprenticeship centered around HVAC, electrical, plumbing, and construction. So again, we're not trying to maybe compete with our CC RESA or ECA RESA classes, but we also know too that that's just a better option for some students. So that is something that we visited. Brian and I visited that a couple of years ago, pre-COVID, and it's supported by a lot of local business people that we're trying to get up and running. Right now, they work primarily with Holt, just because of the proximity. They're located out Pennsylvania behind Toyota, but it's a great facility, and I think it'd be a good option for our students.
Second question of that, I see you have it listed as for 11th and 12th graders. Will there be some type of like prep for like 9th and 10th to get them ready?
Possibly, because it's more work-based learning.
Okay.
So that's why so really what our focus, what we want to start doing with our students is get most of our students through like our core classes, freshman, sophomore, early junior year, and then really start pushing students either in that college or career pathway, where they're taking the AP classes, dual enrollment, CC RESA, EAT RESA, or work-based learning. And so that's why they're looking at 11th and 12th grade, because that still is an option for those students who graduate, because again, that leads to apprenticeships, and they are looking for all upperclassmen. Some prep work, prior to, but it's more about what their interests are.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Because it's a classroom and the work base.
Gotcha. I think it's a great addition. I was just asking.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I think this is great. Did they have some kind of certification? Did they receive a certification?
They received certification as well.
Okay.
Yep.
Excellent. More questions?
I have a comment. On the AP classes section, it said that students earn credit by taking an AP exam, and I would like clarification that says passing an AP exam with a particular score.
Yeah, 3, 4, or 5.
Yeah,
so we'll add that to it.
Okay, thank you.
It's not necessarily guaranteed, though.
Well, it depends on where you go to college.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to nitpick the language that much.
Passing
but
score at CMU is different than.
No, I clearly understand
Yeah.
that, but
Just wonder if it messes that up.
You could just do an asterisk pending
Yeah, and that's-
university criteria.
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. All right, all in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The recommendation by Superintendent Sean Spicker that the Board of Education approve, let me back up a little bit, sorry guys. Deb received a electronic ballot from NASB to cast the board's vote on approval of a candidate. We actually have a candidate that's running from our board, John Tramontana. And so the recommendation by Superintendent Sean Spicker that the Board of Education approve to vote for John Tramontana for a 3-year term to represent Region 4 on the NASB Board of Directors. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Support. Moved and supported. Do you want to give your campaign speech now or anything like that?
No, there's just to let everybody know, there are 3 candidates. There has not been someone in this region that kind of stretches up to the Saginaw Valley from Clinton County in at least 17 years, to my knowledge, is what it goes back to. So trying to get more geographic balance on the board of directors, I think makes sense. The other 2 candidates are from Midland and from Frankenmuth. And so it's just me running over on this side, and I think that would be beneficial for us as a county to have that representation.
Well, thanks for stepping up to do that. Sure. You never serve on too many boards. So we have a vote. All in favor, please say aye.
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 Any opposed?
Good luck.
Thanks. Motion carries. Good luck, John. All right. There's recommendation, and then back up again. Dr. Spickert's contract under the extension item number 13 of the contract provides that not later than March 1st of each year, the board will consider extending the contract for an additional 1-year period. Just because of unforeseen circumstances, we're not going to be able to have the evaluation process done by March 1st. So the solution suggested was to push that deadline to do the evaluation and update the contract. So we'll amend that section of the contract by which we're supposed to amend the contract. So we're amending it to, everyone follows that, from March 1st, 2022 to June 1st, 2022, just to give us a few more months to get that evaluation in, and we can then negotiate a new contract. So, it's a recommendation by Superintendent Sean Spicker that the Board of Education amend the superintendent's contract under item 13, deadline from March 1, 2022 to June 1, 2022 for the 2021-2022 school year due to unforeseen circumstances. Do we have a motion?
So moved.
Support.
Any more discussion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right, motion carries. Public communications for items not found on the agenda.
Theo Randall?
Good evening, everybody. Happy Valentine's Day. Theo Randall. I am here on behalf of the DeWitt archery team. We were very excited. We just got a phone call giving us a heads up that next month, hopefully we can be on the agenda for a 10-minute presentation, which I hope you guys will all find very educational and awesome, and in doing so, an open invite to attend one of our range practices that we had the honor of having the superintendent, the athletic director, and I believe our educational community ed director all attend. So anytime that you guys can do that on Tuesday or Thursday night, we would love to have you. I'll be there coaching from 5:30 to 8 o'clock, so that should give you time to get home back. Either way, a phone call, I'd be happy to give you my phone number directly whenever everybody can make it. We'd have a good time doing that, and hosting you there for it. Also, we have some very exciting news. Just 2 weeks ago, our team qualified for states. We're very excited for the middle school and high school teams to do so. And last week, we qualified for nationals. They are exceptionally happy, excited, got our first trophy. The middle school team took second place. The high school team, the high school team took third place. And our tournament coming up here February 19th, this coming Saturday, I would love to have the entire community come out and support these kids and what they're achieving right now. If we could please use the DeWitt Facebook page to do so and invite people out, I would love to have you post that out for us.
Make sure you send the information to that.
Okay, I'll make sure that you have that, thank you. And then for the public here, February 19th, if you guys, this coming Saturday, could attend our archery, I think you'd all love it. We have a couple of our archers here. They are just growing with the sport. I believe you did your high score Thursday night. It's just been a joy to watch these kids excel in the sport. Hopefully next year we can grow this into an elementary, utilizing Herbison Woods with the 4th and 5th grade program, having a range there, and maybe even growing the middle school having a range, and ultimately the high school having its own range. We are having 21 schools from around Michigan attend this tournament this Saturday. 252 kids signed up. We're expecting at least 1,000 people to attend this event. This is just growing. I think it's going to be an awesome thing for the community as a whole and the school in general.
Did you say where?
It'll be at the middle school.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah, sorry if I didn't clarify that. We're hopefully our next tournament, if we can get it set up properly, maybe the big gym at the high school, maybe double that, 500 kids, 2,000 attendance. The more schools that we can invite, depending on the flights, the targets, each target can have 2 children. The tournament starts, let's see here, 9 a.m. As the first flight, a flight is 20 targets with 40 children at the time at the line shooting, and our last one is at 4:30. So it's an all-day event. I mean, it's going to take some time. It's a lot of fun. Just like if you've ever been to a wrestling tournament, they take all day long. But in general, I think the kids have a great time. The other thing I'd like to ask and talk about is our educational curriculum through NASP. which requires 10 hours of education for archery in the classroom, which during our presentation we can go into fully. I'll have the paperwork. I'll be able to explain that in full detail with hopefully superintendents and other coaches from Portage, Grand Ledge, East Lansing, whoever we can invite to come over here and give a quick 1 or 2 minute showdown of what they're doing with their program and how it benefits them and how it will help us here too. Thank you very much.
Yeah, good luck. Congratulations and good luck.
What's that? I'm sorry.
Congratulations and good luck.
Thank you very much.
McCall Church.
I think I messed up. I'm talking about masks. So, last night, 70,000 people were maskless at the Super Bowl. Today, our children were forced to wear masks. I interviewed my 6-year-old, and I asked her what she thinks about masks. She does not like them. She wears glasses. They make it hard to see. I asked her which subject was the hardest, and she told me library because she cannot read the books or see the pictures. I wanted to address the new board member. It has been voted on, right, that you've been talking about who. It would be nice if the new board member had an interest in the special needs community. My oldest has special needs. She attended DeWitt. I homeschool her now. We've been advised by numerous people to leave DeWitt and go somewhere else that has a better special needs community, classroom and inclusion. And I just want to say that I support personal choice, and please unmask our children. Thank
you. And Deidre Thompson.
Hi, Deirdre Thompson, DeWitt Township. I'm still not clear on what 1A versus 1B versus what's going to happen in the future for masks. We spent so much energy on this and are tired of talking about masks. So if you're sick, stay home. If you're not sick, go to school. That's all I'm going to say. Number 2, the high school students had to select classes on Thursday, but we're voting on the curriculum guide today, so I'm a little confused why that wasn't done sooner. Number 3, the football field is important, but when are we going to be installing the HVAC systems for better air circulation? And then what I really wanted to talk about today was a very different topic. I have 3 sons, and very, very, very seldom do I receive any information about what happens at school, because they're boys and they're boys. They just don't talk about what happens at school. They don't, whatever. So when I do get some information, I listen very, very carefully. And so a couple weeks ago, my son said to me, "Hey Mom, what's that thing that elects the president? The Electoral College?" Yeah, that. My teacher said that that should not exist and we should have a popular vote. I do thank this teacher for opening up an opportunity for me to have a discussion about why the United States is a constitutional republic and not a democracy, and the purpose of the Electoral College. I'm not so sure my son felt the same way about that discussion because, he's a teenage boy. But my greatest concern here was that the teacher did not encourage critical thinking. She told her opinion, and that opinion was to be adopted and thought of as correct and right. And a teacher's job is never to force their opinion on a student. A teacher should always foster critical thinking and should be presenting facts. It may have been a good idea to talk about the Federalist Papers, 39 and 68, to create some sort of understanding behind the logic of the Electoral College, have students investigate, and maybe do a debate on it. That would have been a great way to approach this topic. But that was not it. It was approached as, this is my opinion, and the popular vote is the way that we should go. And this clearly does not meet what our district has as its vision in terms of critical thinking, and I hope that in the future critical developing critical thinking will be part of our CLT. Thank you.
Thank you.
That is all the public comments.
Superintendent's report.
So we've spoken a lot already, but I have just a few updates on teaching and learning. Just want to make sure we continue to praise the principals, teachers, and support staff for all that they're doing and going above and beyond. And as a reminder, we do have the Pride Award that can be given to those, so for families to be able to recognize those staff members that are going above and beyond is a $20 donation to the foundation, but then also gets that staff member a certificate of appreciation, a lapel pin, and then some praise on social media. Last week was Counselor Appreciation Week, so I think it's really important to recognize that group of staff members, so counselors and social workers, a very big thank you to them. And lastly, we are forming another task force for school safety, so that will include both of the chiefs and then representatives from each of the buildings to continue our discussions on the protocols that we use. There's a safety grant that we'll be working on as well, and then the staff and student training to go along with those protocols. That's all I have for you this month.
All right. Make a motion to adjourn. Sorry.
I had a go back question.
Yeah.
Oh, I thought you were falling asleep
No,
already.
it's so quick to adjourn. I get it, believe me, I want to adjourn too. But there's good, going back to the mask group, and then subsequently we learned from the community. I guess at this point, I would be curious to know, from the superintendent, what are all the school districts in Clinton County that are not like us? I mean, we heard it from the parents that were here. I would expect to hear the same thing from the superintendent. If it is only us and Bath, then I think there's another aspect to that we have to share with the community, why we're different than the rest of the schools in the same county. They're following the same health department requirements. So I think this is where it gets back to, I think actually it was during the interviews, around transparency. I think at the very least we should then not have to wait till the next board meeting.
So as far as, so Bath had decided after they had an outbreak that they were going to do a mask plan. And then CC Risa, the same thing, so it was after the Memorial Day holiday. So I think that the recommendation came as having the mask plan because that's what the health department had they had recommended and following that guidance. So that's why we went the way that we had gone. We are following what those recommendations are for health and safety and what the medical experts have said, and that's why we went that route. So, and I also think that, if we're talking about transparency, that we had a larger portion of our community that supported masking. You might not recognize that from some of the board meetings. And the fact that, we talked a little bit about leading from heart, and I just feel that because of the experts and the recommendations that they have, it's important to me to make sure that our staff and students are safe, and that was the plan that I felt best did that. And that was what I had spoke about and carried through, so.
Well, just to clarify, you are planning to, it sounds like Montgomery Foundation, change, you're going to follow one, you're going to do 1B.
So yes, so communicating tomorrow that we will be following 1B, which is meaning if it's substantial, then K-12 masking becomes optional versus required, so it'll be recommended versus required. And so that's the communication that will go out unless the board wants to do something otherwise. And again, I'm open to that, but I just feel that listening to the stakeholders, being involved in the task force, that current plan uses the data, the metrics that we've been using all along, and as the data is declining, the masks will naturally come off versus some just projected date out.
Yeah, I think where the curiosity, my question is how many of the schools within Clinton County?
Bath and DeWitt have the mandate. The other schools do not. So that's Fowler, Ovid LC, and St. John's. Again, I've spoken with the superintendents, and the reports that are in the Lansing State Journal are, the data is just done differently, testing is done differently in the districts. Ovid LC and St. John's have had to close their buildings in grade levels, and we have not. And so I think that that's something else to take a look at. Our plan did not include, and I think it's important to talk about our plan because there's a lot of question about that, and I tried to talk about this last time, is that didn't account for after-school activities because there was a compromise based on what community wanted, and I think that the chart that Mr. Holland had shared with you speaks to the outside of school transmission, because the peak happened a lot around the holiday time, so when kids they're not in school, they're with their families, they're at different events, they're traveling, and so the difference between the two reports, of the momentum of the difference of the masking, or moderately masking or not masking at all, was kind of lost in that. And again, there are districts that have said we're not going to do this, but I don't feel comfortable in not following the advice of the medical professionals and making sure that we're not doing everything we can to keep kids in school.
So good. Support. Move to support it. All in favor? Say aye. Aye. Any opposed? We're adjourned.